Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. Our program will begin now. Please welcome to the stage Stephen Engel, Chief North Asia Correspondent, Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Selamat pagi. Good morning, everybody. Everyone have some breakfast, get your coffee. We have the cowboy hat in the room. Fantastic. Ready to get going. Welcome to this Bloomberg CEO Forum at, of course, the G20. It's so wonderful to be back in Bali and to be traveling. I am Stephen Engel, the Chief North Asia Correspondent for Bloomberg Television, but I'm not just limited to North Asia. I have extensive experience throughout Southeast Asia. In fact, I lived in Lombok for a couple of months back in the Asian financial crisis of 1997, living on a little island, Gili Trawangan. So I rode out the Asian financial crisis on a little island while the rest of the world, of course, well, Asia did, was swimming in crisis. Hopefully we're not heading towards another crisis in Southeast Asia as we are seeing some storm clouds. In fact, our keynote fireside chat is going to be talking about the hurricane of risks that are out there. She will be joining us, Sri Mulyani, in just a few minutes. I'd like to get through some housekeeping before we start. Whether you are joining us virtually or here in the room with us, from all of us at Bloomberg Television, obviously, and Bloomberg, I should say, welcome, a very warm welcome, and thanks for hosting us, Indonesia and Bali. Today we discuss actionable solutions to the most pressing issues we are facing after 3 difficult years to ensure responsible, inclusive, and sustainable growth. I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge as well our presenting sponsor, LPS. And now a few quick notes of housekeeping. If you're tuning in virtually, we have any issues with audio or video quality, try to refresh your browser. That is the typical turn it on, turn it back on, turn it off, turn it back on, and see if you can get it going. It should be all right. If it doesn't work, you can use the chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen for support. All right. I want to remind you as well that what's vital to these conversations that we're going to have today is having you participate as well. So we're going to solicit questions from the audience through the electronic means, and I'll try to get to as many questions as I can possibly entertain. We're also going to be polling you throughout, and here's how it will work. Please scan the QR code. I need my glasses. I'm not so young anymore. Please scan the QR code on your badges or on your screen, and you can respond to polls sending in a question for our moderators, including myself. Shall we practice one? You guys probably know that the World Cup is coming up. Please get out your phones and have a go at answering this question, and answer it honestly. So here's our first poll question of the day. They're going to be a little bit more difficult, this one. The question is, who will win the World Cup? One of the giants of the sports, or option D, an underdog? Please look at the slide. You're seeing the results coming in. Oh, come on, Brazil. That's the easy choice. Wales. You picking Wales? England. Not United States, I'm sorry. We play a different brand of football. So place your votes now. We'll reveal the results while they're coming in. Oh, somebody did. 7% Wales. I like you. I like the underdog. All right, one final point. Please engage with us on social media using the hashtag BBG, which is short for Bloomberg, BBGG20. BBGG20, hashtag BBGG20. Thanks again for joining us. Let's get the party started.
This is a beautiful country that's blessed with an abundance of natural resources. From them, we trade. Public welfare should be supported by sound finance. Therefore, banking plays a very significant role in the national financial industry. IDIC strengthens its presence as a trusted institution that promotes and maintains financial system stability. From us, for us. IDIC.
Please welcome to the stage LPS CEO Lana Solistianingsih.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The Honorable Mrs. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance, Republic of Indonesia, Mr. Purbaya Yudi Sadewa, Chairman of Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, Member of Board of Commissioner of Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, Bapak Didi Madiono, Ibu Destri Damayanti, Bapak Dian Ediana Rai, all of distinguished speakers and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us all. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, greetings of virtue, Selamat pagi. It is truly an honor for me as the CEO of Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation to warmly welcome all of you today to the Bloomberg CEO Forum, a side event of G20 Presidency of Indonesia, Recover Together, Recover Stronger. Selamat datang, welcome to Bali, Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation is an integral part of Indonesia financial safety net, which serve Indonesian depositors by ensuring their deposit, conducting field bank resolution, and managing bank restructuring program if a financial crisis occurs. Of course, subject to an activation by the President's approval. IDIC makes depositors feel confidence to save in Indonesian bank and maintain the financial system stability according to its authority. To all CEOs that present today, whether you are in the ballroom with me or whether you are attending it online, do not worry to invest in Indonesia and save your money in Indonesian banks. Today, we are truly honored as a presenting sponsor for the Bloomberg CEO Forum, moving forward together. For this event, we would like to thank our partner, Bloomberg, and special appreciation to the Coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment Affairs for inviting IDIC to participate in the side events of the G20 Presidency of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has left very important lessons to all countries, including Indonesia, that economic performance is not independent to non-economic factors. Instead, there are many non-economic factors that can affect long-term economic performance significantly, including public health, digital technology, and renewable energy sources. In public health sector, the pandemic has shown us that the world needs more resilient health infrastructure and innovation. Meanwhile, the social activity restriction has become a strong catalyst for public awareness on the needs of digital technology. Besides the pandemic, the threat of climate change is real, and this risk, if not mitigated properly, we will be able to disturb the long-term economic performance and the future of our next generation. Therefore, the need of greener city are needed. In this context, Indonesia is going to move its capital city from Jakarta in Java Island to Nusantara in Borneo or Kalimantan Island, with green and smart capital city concept. This is really a monumental step of Indonesia to show the world how we committed to greener world. Accordingly, to its utmost important for Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation to give our support for more resilient global health system, digital transformation, and transition to renewable resources. Indonesia government under the leadership of the current President Joko Widodo has pledged to foster a safe, equal, and growth-oriented business environment. The IDIC, in line with its mandate, will fully support this by actively promoting financial system stability by minimizing risk to the banking system. In this opportunity, allow me again to invite you to invest in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, closing this spotlight, on behalf of Indonesia Deposit Insurance Corporation, I would like also thank all the distinguished speakers, panelists, and participants of this Bloomberg CEO Forum, reiterating the 2022 G20 Summit's theme, Recover Together, Recover Stronger. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Please welcome to the stage Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Indonesia, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel.
Selamat pagi again.
Selamat pagi.
We met a few, whoa, hello. We met a few years ago. You had the hospitality to have me in your office in Jakarta. I flew down from Hong Kong and we had a lovely conversation. It's always great for the Chief North Asia correspondent to get down to one of my favorite parts of the world, and that is, of course, Southeast Asia. And what a success story, of course, the Indonesian economy has been against obvious global headwinds right now. And you also kindly spoke with Bloomberg in October. You talked about a hurricane of different stresses and risks to the global economy, and that's going to impact emerging economies, even one that is producing GDP growth in excess of 5%. You're doing well. Yes. But I'm not here as a cheerleader. I'm here to ask the tough questions, right? So
I'll take the opportunity to cheer everybody up.
Absolutely. I mean, what do you think are going to be the biggest risks? Let's start with a big umbrella question. Given, of course, there is the specter of inflation, a rising inflation here. Your central bank has raised by, I believe, 125 basis points. More rate hikes are possibly in the cards. What are the biggest risks right now from your assessment, from your position as the Minister of Finance for Indonesia?
Well, we are all very much aware that the global economic situation post-pandemic, or even it is not yet post-pandemic, it's actually creating a quite complex environment for us to respond. First, the pandemic required us to do an extraordinary policy, fiscal, monetary, all over the world. And that have the consequences, because then you have the supply disruption because of the pandemic nature of treatment, in this case, in which the mobility of people as well as economic activity will be hampered by the pandemic. And then we have the geopolitical situation, the war in Ukraine, that's even creating a more complex supply disruption. That's created inflation, high, especially from food, fertilizer, energy prices, and that's pushed the inflation up, requiring especially monetary policy to respond even more, in this case, after their extraordinary policy due to the pandemic. So that complexity is the one in which all countries, including Indonesia in this case, facing with a situation in which your policy space shrinking, both fiscal and monetary, because of what you have done for the pandemic using your extraordinary measures. And now you are facing with a much more complex of high inflation That is followed by a very steep increase of the interest rate, especially from advanced country. That's make the currency, especially US dollar, becoming very, very strong. That complexity is creating what we recall like 2008, 2009, in which the volatility index increased, exchange rate weakening, interest rate up, inflation up, and that's definitely can have a potential effect on a stability of the financial side. That is the biggest now in our position of how we are going to manage this complexity, while we are at the same time have to navigate and continue promoting recovery. Indonesia is actually quite good in terms of, you mentioned 5.7, only above 5%, 5.72 actually.
5.7.
So it's close to 6 rather than
quarter over quarter.
Exactly. That is really quite impressive, but you can see that the cycle of recovery that the Indonesia is a little bit late than the advanced country that put us in a much more advantaged position. When all country declining, especially because of the steep increase in the interest rate and high inflation, which is eroding their domestic demand, then we are still in a position of a very strong recovery. So for us, we have to respond. First, on the fiscal side, of course, this is under my authority, we have to make sure that our fiscal is going to be strong enough to be able to now facing with a different kind of threat, or we call it perfect storm. The pandemic, geopolitical, climate change, technology, and now the monetary and financial upheaval or volatility because of the situation. I think these are all becoming what we want to protect in terms of the recovery process of the Indonesia economy. Our fiscal side is now anticipating that this is going to happen. That's why we are actually committing to consolidate our fiscal in order for us to be able to then being able to respond to this new challenge, which is actually happening today.
Well, government spending actually came down in the second quarter. It came up a little bit, but still contracted year over year in the third quarter. To weather the downside, do you see more fiscal spending, more stimulus?
Well, if you look at the more detail on the government spending, the declining of the government spending is because last year, the second and the third quarter, our spending, especially on social safety net and for the pandemic-related spending, is hugely increased.
So base effects there.
Yes,
yeah.
Because you have the Delta variant last year, in which we suddenly have to close again, and we provide additional social safety net. So this is just because of high base, especially for last year. But the regular spending of the government, especially for the infrastructure, other human capital spending like education, I think they are still actually growing. And we still have the last quarter this year in which there is a chance for all the ministries to catching up on their spending.
I love it when the audience comes up with a very pointed question right from the start. Can you see that? I like to get the audience involved. Should the Fed be responsible for exporting inflation globally?
Well, like it or not, as an open economy, and if your size is relatively small to the big size of the economy as well as advanced country, what is actually adopted by the Fed policy is definitely have spillover all over the world. So when they have, of course, at the G20, we talk about recover together, recover stronger. Early of this year, we actually committed to say that both exit policy on fiscal and especially monetary policy should be well calibrated, well planned. Of course, you said that well calibrated, that's true. Well planned is a little bit ambitious in a way that no one can really control a lot of things. So in this case, the Federal Reserve, seeing the inflation up, they were thinking at that time it was temporary because it is supply disruption in nature post-pandemic, and then accelerated by the conflict. Then the inflation is stubbornly high because of course, the expansion of the monetary policy since 2008, 2009, and then accelerated again during the pandemic situation. So I think this is going to be like creating a huge response from the Fed by increasing interest rate in such a very high speed. Yeah. So the word well planned is not there, right? well calibrated, then they have to calibrate because of the challenge. So with that, I think the consequence for all over the world is just very clear. You like it or not, dollar is still the biggest denominated transaction in the world. So the stronger dollar definitely will create weaker local currency, and that's creating what you call it imported inflation. But that's not the only culprit in this situation. You also know that the inflation is not only coming from the strong dollar, it is because of the food and energy prices indeed increase.
Well, let me give you some great numbers for you guys. Yes, inflation I think is near a 7-year high. And we've had those 125 basis point rates by the Bank of Indonesia. I guess they're meeting next week as well, possibly more hikes there. Private consumption, which accounts for more than half of domestic output, rose 5.4% in the third quarter after 5.5% in the second quarter. Middle and upper class consumption has strengthened. Commodities exports, which you alluded to, continued to boom. FDI surged to a record last quarter. That's all the good side. But can the Indonesian growth story withstand more rate hikes from the Bank of Indonesia?
Well, before I answer that question first, if you look at the Indonesia inflation, as you just mentioned earlier, you look and dissect it into the element of the factors contributing to the inflation. It's actually quite interesting to see Indonesia first. When we respond to the increasing food and energy price, of course, the choice is just, are you going to just pass through this huge increase because of the global environment, Ukraine war, food because of the both fertilizer as well as the increasing hampering the export of the grain from Ukraine, as well as the energy price because of the sanction. So you see the steep increase of the price. Choice is whether you just allow that to pass through, then weaken your domestic demand. Definitely, by increasing the prices, it definitely is going to erode the purchasing power. Government of Indonesia choose to protect the domestic demand. Have the consequence on our fiscal side, our subsidy increased significantly. Like the fuel subsidy, it's more than triple. And that's the policy choice. Of course, then you can see that household demand is still increased. But then at some point, we have to make also another choice. Do we have to absorb all the shock, or we should actually pass this one? So we decided last September increasing the fuel price by 30%. We expect at that time the inflation is going to up by 6.8%. That is our initial exercise based on what is the cycle of the increase first round and second round. What is happening, our inflation is only increased to 5.9% and now in 5.7%. Deflation happened in September and October. Why? Because the food price increased. Why Indonesia were able to do that? Because the coordination between central government under even President Jokowi looking now in inflation in a very detail, up to the governor, up to the all local government. So that's actually what I call it when I discuss with many of the central banks during the G20 meeting in Washington. I said, if you guys from the monetary policy increase the interest rate because you have to do it, that is like you are using the wide spectrum antibiotic. It's going to affect the whole body of the economy. Yeah. But if the source of the inflation in the supply side, you cannot just using the interest rate up to actually dampen your inflation. You really have to look at the supply side. That's exactly what the Indonesia is doing. So that is good. And you can see the consumption is still very strong on the third quarter. Middle upper household income is actually doing a very, very strong in supporting this recovery process.
On the fiscal front, is there room, given that there are some headwinds, is there room to maybe delay the reimposition of the 3% budget deficit to GDP?
No, we've already approved with the parliament discussion on our budget 2023 last end of September, and we are committed to reduce the fiscal deficit to 2.84%. And that is really based on the assumption which is quite carefully calibrated. We definitely also not fully blind that the global environment is going to be very, very dynamic. So we have to always continue prepare for any eventuality. If you look about the commodity price, it could be increase very steep and then going down. We have it with our CPO, that is palm oil. We go up to 1,700 and then go down to 700. Coal in this case, traditionally is only around 100. and now it's going up to 400, and then going up a little bit. So we see that this kind of volatility on commodity need to be managed carefully by us. But the momentum of growth still need to be maintained, and I think we can do that.
Globally, what do you think, as Indonesia, the chair of the G20 this year, what do you hope will come of the G20 meeting? If there are significant risks, if we go into global recession in 2023, we have to find ways to mitigate the risks, of course, of sovereign debt risks and possibilities, but also, as you've been alluding to, the food and energy crisis. What do you hope can come of G20, or is it just going to be a talk fest and no action?
Well, we actually taking this presidency with the hope that after 2.5 years of the pandemic, we are going to be able to recover together, recover stronger. That's not just a theme. It is the theme in which we are trying to create a collaboration among the G20 and even beyond. Why? Because first, post-pandemic, we also see that the scarring effect and exit strategy need to be designed carefully. But then we are facing with this food and energy price. That's why in the leaders meeting, the first session is going to talk about the global economy and food and energy prices. Don't forget that the pandemic is still actually creating a huge cost for the global economy. We should learn from that. And that's why on this leaders meeting, again, we are talking about the health issue on the pandemic, how globally we can prepare better. And we've already also established the pandemic fund or financial intermediary facility, which can create and support many countries to prepare better for the pandemic. Third, we are talking about climate change, sustainability. It is now on the COP27 in Egypt, and we are going to continue support commitment of reducing the CO2, whether from the energy transition mechanism, whether you are talking about how to deliver your nationally determined contribution. I think this is going to be very important, and leaders is going to have a commitment on that. And the last one is about the digital economy and inclusion. I think you are all agree, and today we are talking about crypto's situation, and then all the digital technology that can create an opportunity but also disruption. So how we are going to make sure that we are going to be able to use this digital technology in a much more positive way, including on financial inclusion. So these are all is going to be the area that the leaders is going to talk. It's not going to talk, then there is a commitment. There is a deliverable, especially on the finance and central bank governor track, which we discussed quite a lot of technical issue, including the debt issue on many emerging and low-income country, which is definitely is going to be something that need to be addressed, because with the trend of the interest rate high, some country which very limited fiscal space, they are going to face with a very, very difficult situation.
Well, I was learning through the Bloomberg terminal this morning that perhaps this green funding plan that President Jokowi has been kind of pitching to some of the more wealthy nations is perhaps coming through. We haven't gotten complete confirmation. Upwards of $15 billion US, maybe $20 billion from the US, Japan, and others to sign this deal to help Indonesia begin its transition on its over-reliance on coal. I know you're not the energy minister. This is not necessarily part of your portfolio, but still, as finance minister, how important is this transition to lessen the dependence on coal?
Well, I will
economically and climate change-wise?
No, I will correct you. The role of the Ministry of Finance is actually very important. You cannot design the transition mechanism because you know that the dimension of this transition hugely on the fiscal side. Whether you are going to incentivize or you are going to subsidize implication in terms of the public spending, that is really huge. That's why we're working very closely with the Ministry of Energy, as well as coordinating Minister of Investment and Maritime, which is in charge for all designing this energy transition mechanism. President Jokowi has already announced in the COP26, that is last year, that we are going to do the energy transition, retiring coal earlier. And then even in this case, we've already designed with the PLN, that is electricity company, to identify which power plant which is going to be retired, how much it costs, what does it mean in terms of fiscal side, PLN balance sheet, as well as the private sector, especially if this is belong to the IPP, that is the independent power purchase, private sector owned. And then we also discuss about what does it mean if we are going to introduce like carbon tax, how we are going to introduce even carbon market in Indonesia, which is not yet exist. What I'm saying is that Indonesia doing a lot of very serious and credible work in order for us to be able to deliver this commitment. And of course, with all the rich country, which is also asking Indonesia, because we are the biggest also the coal producer in the world, and that's why they're asking, without Indonesia participation, it's going to be impossible to deliver this global commitment. So it's really like the just affordable in which the participation of who's actually polluting the world should also pay. I think it's really exactly what we are trying to achieve here. So I'm glad next week, I'm not going to spoil because this is really our leaders level is going to announce this kind of commitment, which I do hope the size is going to be big enough to create confidence in terms of delivering the transition of the energy.
I was digging for a Bloomberg scoop here.
Yeah.
Let's stay on that theme. The audience is asking, what's needed to fulfill Indonesia's EV dream? Everyone wants to get into electric vehicles. Can Indonesia as well?
Well, it is. First, Indonesia is a big country with a growing middle upper class household. So this is going to be a big market domestically. But also we know that the commitment globally with this climate change, there will be a trend that for transportation vehicle, they are going to go to this electric vehicle. So the question is who's going to produce what in this case? And Indonesia will position very well in not only providing the investment climate, our CEO of this sponsor to this saying then please invest to Indonesia. And we are not just telling you to invest because I don't think you are going to invest by this kind of seminar, but we are going to like provide you with a real investment climate. If you're on the industrial complex, what is the incentive being need by the investors for the electric vehicle? So this is not just offering Indonesia own market, domestic market, but also in terms of the investment to Indonesia. And that can create a huge external balance for Indonesia that for us to be able to withstand this global upheaval as of today. For Indonesia own domestic, we actually use our fiscal tools in order for us to convert into electric vehicle market. So we now taxing not based on, in the past it is taxing based on the big of the machine, that is the CC. The bigger we consider as a luxury car, then you have to pay higher tax. Today, we actually taxing based on the CO2 emission.
Right.
So the less you are emit, then you are going to be less tax for your vehicle. And that will definitely change the behavior of the people in Indonesia.
I have such a long list of questions. We could go for hours, I think, here, and I think the audience
But
would love it. But I want to end our half-hour session here with a question that will dovetail nicely to our next conversation, and that is about banking and payments. And I understand a number of Southeast Asian nations are at least putting together a proposal, if they didn't sign it in ASEAN, essentially coming up with payments and settlements through QR codes, like essentially, in some cases, bypassing the dependence of settlement in US dollars. How important is that?
It is very important, I think, for all countries as well as the region to actually look at the alternative way also. I think the war in Ukraine and the sanction to Russia will provide a very valuable lesson. But also, factually, many countries feel that they actually can do the transaction directly, bilaterally, using their both local currency, which is, I think, is good for the world to have a much more balanced, what you call it, using of the currency and payment system, which is, I think, the initiative by Bank Indonesia to have this collaboration with some ASEAN countries is really good. I think we are very much support on that. It also can increase more digitalization on our payment system internally within Indonesia, but also within regionally, it's going to provide more resilience. So I'm very much strongly support, as well as commending the central bank initiative with many of the ASEAN countries to do that.
I'm like the high-speed train that they're building out of Jakarta. I always arrive on time. 10 seconds left. Final words. I like to give my interview subjects the last word. Is anything else you want to say to all the people streaming this and also in the
Well, Indonesia is always like formulating policy based on our assessment how the global is going to affect us, but also identifying our own source of growth. So we try to always combine our policy instrument fiscally, monetary, and structural policy. We did and we continue doing a lot of structural reform, which is, I think, provide Indonesia with a good investment climate. We are currently talking with the parliament regarding the financial sector reform, which is, I think, is going to be one of the most building block for our reform. So a lot of homework has been done, good monetary and fiscal policy, sound fiscal as well as monetary framework, stability at the macro level, political level, and a very credible policy. So where else in the world you are going to find a good place to invest? It's Indonesia.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sri Mulyani Indrawati, thank you very much for hosting us at Bloomberg here in Bali, Indonesia. Terima kasih banyak.
Terima kasih. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, this way. This way.
Please welcome to the stage Melissa Musa Rusli, President Director at Permata Bank, and Animesh Narang, CEO of Home Credit Indonesia, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel.
I think we're being upstaged by the finance minister right now. That's okay. We'll let everybody pay their respects to the Honorable Sri Mulyani while we slowly transition to our next segment. That's why I left that last question kind of talking about the banking and financial situation and cross-border payments and the like. I wish he'd sit down and listen to this. Thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak. So let's begin with what Sri Mulyani just said. Maybe we can start down here with, or Permata Bank. Let's start here and then we'll move down to Home Credit. We have Melissa Musa Rusli, President and Director of Permata Bank. Thank you very much for joining us. And also Pak Animesh Narang, CEO of Home Credit Indonesia. Thanks for joining us on this stage. So was there something that stood out to you on the outlook for the Indonesian economy from Sri Mulyani?
Yeah, so I'm quite excited with the closing remark from Ibu Sri Mulyani that we need to improve our investment climate and we should put more investment into Indonesia. And that is the role of the Indonesian banks, that we are ready to support the investment into the country because now the banking sector is much more in a better position. We are more resilient to face with this uncertainty of the global economy as well as the slowdown in the certain sectors in Indonesia. And I think this is also the time for the Indonesian company to invest more into the domestic economy, as well as to invite the foreign companies to come to Indonesia, especially to selected sectors that we know that will further improve our economy. The first one is F&B, second one in telco sectors, and third one in the downstream of the mining business. So it's a little bit too loud. So I hope that my colleagues also who are here from the Indonesian banks, we are actually ready to support the economy, to support the Indonesian companies, to support as well the support from the regulators for us to work together with the other banks in ASEAN, especially with the initiative from Bank Indonesia. We support this the interoperability between countries in ASEAN on the payment system as well as the other digital initiatives that already been in place.
How do you see the M&A environment here in Indonesia right now? It helps that there's a strong economy, but there are global headwinds, as we just talked about. In fact, your bank was bought by Bangkok Bank in 2020 during the pandemic, and I believe now, I guess you can start realizing those synergies.
Yes. So the trend of M&A is actually not slowing down. It's even now Indonesia has become the center of this investment hub. We've seen that many of your colleagues from the fintech sectors also looking at Indonesia as the main source of growth in the coming years, especially in the context of the ASEAN countries. And I'm actually wanted to hear more from my colleague in here from
Oh, I'm getting to him. I'm getting to him.
Yeah, but again, we have a lot of factors to attract the investment as well as the acquisition. But again, for us, we need to have a stronger economy driven also by the local players. So the acquisition by Bangkok Bank for Permata is actually to improve more, to make the Indonesian banking sector even more stronger with the support of the regional banks like Bangkok Bank.
Animesh, what do you take away from Sri Mulyani's speech and the outlook for the Indonesian economy as it reflects on your business?
I think the policy outlook is very much in line with what we see on the ground. Right? So we are covering about 200 cities in Indonesia, right? And our customer base, which is about 6 million, represents all socioeconomic segments. And they are generally cautiously optimistic about their future, right? They are cautious because of increasing pricing of energy and food, but they're optimistic because they see incomes recover, right? They see financial products available to them, which allows them to start building additional lines of revenue. For example, Indonesia is a highly entrepreneurial society. So through productive financing that fintech and companies like us offer, they are now adding to the income that they were generating, so which gives them optimism as well, right? So from a policy level and the basic assumptions that are there for the planning of Indonesia is very much in line with what we see on the ground. So I think there's good alignment there.
If there are storm clouds gathering, how do you best mitigate the risk? And this is a kind of a question to both of you. And I know the Indonesian banking sector and the Indonesian populace, it's only about 50% banked. 50% or thereabouts of Indonesians have bank accounts. So you provide a service of somewhat minor or micro loans to a sector of the economy that can't get bank loans. How do you mitigate the risks if the economy does turn sour?
So I think first, we got 25 years of experience of doing it, right? As a global entity, starting in Central Europe, we've been in emerging economies for the last 20-odd years, right? All the big ones, China, India, Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, we are present there. So we have deep experience in dealing with credit cycles, economic cycles, and how to run a business in these challenging environments. It's part of our DNA, it's part of our culture. Second, as an institution, we have strong processes and risk controls to make sure that it doesn't become an institutional problem. Third, we are using what we call non-traditional sources of data, right? So when we're trying to evaluate customers who don't have regular income streams or are daily wage workers, how do you evaluate the creditworthiness?
How do you do that?
That's kind of our secret sauce, right? So
they want to know.
No. But I think that's the expertise we have built, right? And that's what allowed us to scale up our business in Indonesia and gives us comfort that we want to keep growing our business. We are going to grow about 30% this year over last year. We are planning about 50% growth next year. We are comfortable with these numbers largely because of the fact that we believe that even in these challenging circumstances, we have the processes, the technology, and generally the environment for growth.
Well, Melissa, what's your secret sauce as far as mitigating risks and incorporating fintech to help mitigate those risks?
Yeah, so for us, I think we have, in general, Indonesian banks, we have quite strong prudent banking, risk management, as well as strong good governance to improve also our process to be able to tap this segment of the fintech that also targeting. I think most importantly in here is that if we are looking at the Indonesian bank industry, our capital adequacy ratio is very strong. Right now at the level of 24% on average. I mean, Permata is one of the highest at 33%. So
this is the capital adequacy ratio.
That's right.
CAR.
Yeah, for CAR. And also in looking at the liquidity right now, we are still okay in the industry. It's about close to 85%. And also it shows that we are ready to actually distribute more of our to loan to certain sectors. And to tap for this, the untapped bankable, also underbanked, we are actually working very closely with players like fintech as well as the non-bank financial institutions to be able to increase not only from the financial inclusion, but also to improve our own process. Because we also get a lot of data from working with the fintech, for example, to improve our credit scoring as well as the analysis of the customer behaviors. So actually, in fact, in the past 2 years, I've been working very closely with Home Credit to channel the loan to certain segment, especially to the small micro segment. And this is the area that for banks like Permata, we only have close to 300 branches around Indonesia. We need extended distribution channel to be able to tap this segment, and working together with fintech is one of the solutions for us.
Do you find, and I'm not the expert on the regulatory environment in Indonesia, and this maybe is a question to both of you, is the regulatory environment, I mean, the whole world is dealing with regulating fintech, and in China, I know that, which I cover extensively, it's the platform economy that moved into fintech, and then there was heavy regulation to kind of take the micro lending out of the platforms because they had so many users. Do you find the regulatory environment, I know there's probably government officials in the audience here, but just give me your unvarnished view on the regulatory environment as far as adopting new fintech ways of doing business.
The OJK, I think, learned from the Chinese experience, right? They're looking, the OJK officials OJK is a fantastic regulator, right? And they've been looking at experiences from China and broader trends, and they were ahead of a lot of the markets to regulate fintech. So there are clear regulations that were placed earlier on, and they were updated recently. So they've made sure that there's a clear policy and regulatory framework, which is making sure that the excesses of fintech, which happen in countries like China, are not repeated in Indonesia. Generally, there's a new board of commissioners that have been put in place by the parliament, I think July of this year, and we'll see how they want to take it forward. But again, we believe, knowing the history of the OJK, and they're always finding the right balance between stimulating growth, because they recognize the need for institutions like ours to drive financial inclusion, and also to have the right framework so that it doesn't become a systemic risk for the economy and the country. So, and they've done a fantastic job during COVID times. If you look at, I think they were among the best regulators during COVID times.
Well, in Indonesia, obviously, it's an archipelago that stretches so many miles and across so many different islands. How do you see that preventing or encouraging the adoption of digital payments and digital lending?
You know, we see opportunity outside of Java, right? I think I look at Indonesia as two parts. Like, we have Jakarta, Banten, and West Java as one area, and the rest of Indonesia, right? And the first area is heavily penetrated by credit. Like in Jakarta, in DKI Jakarta, 30% of people have credit, which is, to me, too high, right? I think 30% of the per capita population of Jakarta have credit, while you go to Sulawesi, it could be less than 1%, right? Now, that's not a regulatory issue. It's simply a distribution challenge, right? I think how financial institutions have approached the business, the concentration of people living in Jakarta, living in West Java and Banten makes it easier to build a business out, and it's just tougher to build a business out in Sulawesi, right? But companies like ours, that's what we specialize in, right? Going to the areas where it's tougher to do business, to be more efficient, and that's what we're doing here.
Here's a good question from the audience. Thanks for participating. How far away are we from seamless intra-ASEAN banking? We talked about it at the end there with Sri Mulyani about how ASEAN nations, including the Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, looking at a deal to create kind of QR code payments cross-border and maybe lessen the reliance on trade settlement and settlement in US dollars.
Yeah, actually now is the time for us to work even more closely with the ASEAN banking sectors, especially, I mean, with all the initiative from our regulator from Bank Indonesia. Recently, we've seen there's some same-day local currency settlement. This is between Indonesia and Thailand, which we just launched actually a month ago. That has proved that actually the stronger we actually work together within this ASEAN, especially from the regulators' perspective, that will have an impact to how the banks in ASEAN can actually operate very seamlessly in terms of from the payment perspective as well as the settlement.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're getting more questions. This is great. Private market seems to be the only safe haven this year. Forecast for 2023. Yeah, I mean, how is your business going to be looking going forward? Rising interest rates is a good for a bank. Net interest margins improve, but then risk profiles.
That I have to challenge you on that
Okay,
part.
please.
So I think we've seen that there's an expectation, right? There's an expansion of NIM for banks, given the increasing of this interest rate. But again, there's a lagging in terms of how we can adjust our lending rates. And of course, from our customer, they would like to have their deposit rates to be increased much faster than how we can improve our lending rates. And again, because Indonesian bank, we want to support the economy. We are playing our role as the financial intermediary, right? So we have to maybe improve a little bit from the NIM perspective. But again, Indonesian banks, as you know, that we are all in healthy conditions to be able to face this uncertainty in the coming year. And the question about whether this NIM would continue to be a major issue for banks, I think it depends on how we see the sustainability of our profitability going forward. I think it's important for banks to increase the confidence level of the customers, to have a sound and robust risk management as well as profitability.
Right. Animesh, what's your risk appetite right now, given the headwinds?
You know, we monitor risk very closely, right? Again, because we are targeting customers all over Indonesia at all socioeconomic segments, we have a good feeling for what's happening in the market. At the moment, we don't see any stress that's bothering us. Generally, as a business, we are very quick to respond. We have processes, like we saw that in COVID. Overnight, we could rebuild our business processes in changing situations. At this point of time, we are cautiously optimistic.
What's your biggest challenge, though?
Talent, most probably.
Talent?
Yeah,
that's a global
digital
problem.
Talent.
Yeah, talent.
I think digital talents is a common issue for not only for fintech but also in banking.
So how do you develop this? This is a long-term process if you grow it organically.
Yeah.
Or you do like Singapore and Hong Kong are trying to do, is give incentives, and Thailand and others trying to get bankers or innovators, fintech people to come to theirs. Is Indonesia on that same competitive path to attract talent or grow talent?
Indonesia is focusing much on growing talent locally, which I believe is a long-term process, but more sustainable. We as a business have been investing quite a lot in people development, right? So we have academies. For example, people are surprised to know that we do our entire data science team sits in Indonesia. It's fully Indonesian. So we have groomed about 15 people. Please don't hire them. From the ground up.
Wait until then.
To do advanced complex modeling, right, on terabytes of data sets, right? So we are building this expertise. We have our entire mobile app, which has 12 million people, developed in Indonesia.
Are you leveraging that data that you have well enough? I remember, and I don't mean to name drop here, but when I talked to Jack Ma about 5-6 years ago, he was saying data is the new oil in the world. Everyone's going to be fighting for the data. Both of your businesses, you're a more traditional lender and a more, micro lender. Is data being harnessed enough?
Yes, that's actually very important. Customer data for us is very key, especially, as you said, right, as a traditional lenders, we don't have enough data. That's actually the reason why we actually work very closely with digital companies to be able to enrich the customer database that we have over years, enrich with the customer behaviors, enrich also with the way they spend their money outside banking sectors. I think that's very important of the collaboration that we have between banking sectors and also the non-bank.
That must be part of your secret sauce.
It is. I'll give you some statistics, right? When we started business in Indonesia, we are evaluating 40 attributes about a customer. 40. Today, we are able to evaluate over 2,000, right? So just to tell you, over the 9 years, how the journey of information has changed in our business, right? Now, I agree that data is the new gold, but you have to be super careful, or the new oil. You're going to be super careful with it, right? There are privacy concerns, there are data protection regulations that need to be very cognizant about, because while you have this data, There's a huge responsibility that comes along with that data, which we're very cognizant about as an organization. But ultimately, this data is giving you huge insights about what's happening, right, in the business. And it allows to react and adjust to the business as the customer needs, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's super important.
Yeah, and that's also important actually for the banks to improve our credit risk assessment as well.
Yeah.
Because right now we rely on, say, financial analysis from their financial from the customers. But with this additional insight, working with the data scoring company, with fintech, that will improve in terms of our risk assessment, and it will improve also the credit quality of the bank.
Well, we have about a minute left. I always want to give you an opportunity to say some of the things that you maybe came prepared to say, but I didn't ask. Is there anything else you'd like to add? And if not, maybe just give your outlook for your business for 2023.
Yes, I think I start with the Indonesian banks. We've seen that the consumer confidence is still strong in Indonesia. And thankfully to the accommodative monetary policy as well by the regulator, there will be some incentive in 2023, especially to support the spending on the consumer loan in property as well as automotive. I think we will see that that will drive the consumer loan growth in 2023.
You think there's going to be more consumer loan growth, even though rates are higher and there's stresses?
We believe that the after this pandemic, because of not after, but during this pandemic, we've seen that actually the growth of the consumer loan is still faster than the other part of the segment.
Pent-up demand?
Most likely because of also the optimism, right, of the economy itself.
Final words?
I think we are fully focused on financial inclusion. We are fully focused on digital literacy, digital awareness, digital inclusion, and we are fully focused on ESG. And these are the big three themes for next year.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to our wonderful panelists. Melissa Musa Rusli, President Director of Permata Bank, and Animesh Narang, CEO of Household Credit Indonesia. Thank you so much.
Thank
Terima
you.
kasih. Thank you.
Thank you, Amines. Thank you.
Hyundai, LG, Volkswagen, and Toyota seem keen. The person who everyone talks about is Tesla, and you have a $5 billion contract to supply nickel ore, but you wanted to have a Tesla car factory. It now looks as if you might get or you hope to get a Tesla battery facility. And I wondered if you could give us any news on that. Is that any closer?
Enggak, yang kita inginkan semua adalah mobil listriknya.
What we want is the electric cars, not the battery. For Tesla, we want to build electric cars in Indonesia. From Ford, electric cars, Hyundai, electric cars. From Japan, Toyota, Suzuki.
Akan menjadi.
And we want a huge ecosystem of electric cars.
You've made a very eloquent case, and Elon Musk is a famously reasonable man. Why has he said no to the car factory then? Is it because of the environmental side?
Masih dalam proses pembicaraan.
It's still in discussion. Let's see later the final result.
You have negotiated with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. Are either of them as difficult to deal with as Elon Musk?
Ya, semua memerlukan waktu. Saya tidak.
Everything needs time.
Cepat langsung ada hasilnya, enggak. Saya kira memang.
I don't want to be quick with no result. It needs an intense communication, and the result will show.
Kemudian hasilnya nanti akan datang.
Please welcome to the stage Pras Ganesh, Executive Vice President, CISO, Toyota Daihatsu Engineering and Manufacturing Company, for a conversation with Bloomberg NEF's Alan Tom Abraham.
It's a pleasure to be with you all today, and thank you for the great welcome. We just heard from the Indonesian president about how electric vehicles could become a pathway for Indonesia to establish an ecosystem and an industry to manufacture vehicles as well as batteries in the future. Electric vehicles as a technology is growing adoption quickly across the world. In fact, in 2022, we are headed towards having the first year in which passenger electric vehicle sales could exceed 10 million units for the first time. Just 5 years back in 2017, passenger EV sales were about 1 million. So 10 times growth in 5 years. And when we look to the future, in NEF's long-term electric vehicle outlook, we expect EV sales to grow to almost 40 million units by 2030 and about 73 million units by 2040. So huge growth opportunities into the future. And with this context, we are privileged to have Mr. Pras Ganesh from Toyota to share the opportunities and challenges that a region like Southeast Asia has as this industry scales up. Pras, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So let's start off with evaluating what are some of the drivers or enablers of electric vehicles in the region. So in your view, what are the enablers for both the adoption as well as manufacturing of electric vehicles in Southeast Asia and Indonesia?
Yeah, thank you for that, Alan. I think in order for us to understand this, first of all, I would like to state that Southeast Asia and Asia in general has excellent prospects for electric vehicle and electrification, both in terms of vehicles as well as parts in the coming years. But the critical element is what are the enablers that allow us to drive scale? Because eventually when we talk about electrification, the most important thing is we need scale to decarbonize, and we also need scale to be able to locally produce. So when we start talking about scaling and doing this speedily, there are three kind of lenses that we talk about within Toyota as the enablers for electrification in any market. The first enabler is really about emissions. Environmental sustainability or emission is kind of a critical element that we need to think about. And here there are two elements we have to talk about. First is the well-to-wheel emission, and the second one is the life cycle emissions. So when we talk about well-to-wheel emissions, it's what is the energy source that we require, or what is the energy source for the vehicle. Still in Asia, unfortunately, the renewable energy actually utilization is not very high. So at the moment, it's still over 90% in terms of non-renewable energy sources in many of the markets, whether it's Indonesia, Thailand, or otherwise. And this is kind of one of the things that we have to speed up and accelerate in terms of renewable energy itself. And even if we talk about levelized cost of energy, right now for renewable energy, it is much higher in most markets other than in India, at least if we look at the Asian market condition itself. So we need to be able to create the factors to drive down the price and create the environment to speed up renewable energy itself. The second is when we talk about the life cycle action, we also need to be able to start looking at how do we look at other elements, for example, not just the vehicle when it's used, but also throughout from the manufacturing process to the end of life. And here I especially want to point out like end-of-life vehicle schemes or 3R activities for batteries. So we need to start getting into these kind of areas as well. So this is on the emission front. That's the first lens. The second lens that we talk about is really the economic lens, and this is absolutely critical. For the economic lens, there are three key stakeholders that we need to focus upon. The first stakeholder is the customer. So the customer has to be able to afford the vehicle. At the end of the day, the customer is selecting the vehicle and buying the vehicle, and it has to meet the customer's needs. And specifically on the economic front for a customer, if we look at a vehicle, and I think I learned this from Bloomberg, BNEF itself, the average price of a vehicle in Asia is around 15,000, 10 to 15,000, for example, in India, and 15 to 20,000 maybe in ASEAN, while maybe in the US it's over 30,000, 35,000. So even if we talk about putting the battery value in Asia would be between 50 to 90% of the price of the vehicle, but maybe in the US or maybe in Europe it could be around 20%. So there's a higher threshold for people to be able to afford it. Until they can afford it, the second stakeholder comes in, which is the government. The government has to then subsidize it. So how long can they subsidize? This is kind of one of the critical elements, and we also need to know that they have to also pay for the infrastructure. And the third key stakeholder is the OEM or the supply chain. As you may know, in Asia, for example, around 12% of the GDP is kind of driven by automotive in Thailand, or around 4% in Indonesia. And there's around, just in Indonesia, for example, over 1.2 million people working in that sector. So we have to allow them for transitioning appropriately. And the third lens, and I'm sorry, it's a bit of a lengthy answer, but the third lens is the customer lens. And this is about how do we get the customer, and this is probably the most important lens, how do we get the customer to understand and what are their factors which determine the choice of a vehicle. Here we have to, of course, understand, I already spoke about price. There's also the infrastructure element that we need to actually allow. And we also need to look at other aspects. For example, charging time, charging use, for example, depending on the usage, how does it make sense for them? Or even other areas like there's some maybe misconceptions or even some issues related to safety. So we need to kind of look at all of these elements. So what I do want to mention is that actually in time, these enablers will steadily mature and the mix of electrification will steadily increase. So I'm very optimistic, but these enablers need to be tackled from all the three lenses.
Sure. So you've given us a lot to unpack, and we have a few minutes here. So emissions, economics, the customer lenses. So when you look at it from understanding the differences between some of the markets which are early adopters in EVs and some of the markets in Asia, what do you think are the unique features, the most important unique features companies should keep in mind when they start off this journey of promoting electric vehicles?
So when we look at Southeast Asia, I already spoke about the vehicle price and I already spoke about energy. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to talk about those. Maybe let me talk about two other factors. The first factor is the diversity. So I think Animesh previously was also mentioning about when we talk about Indonesia, we have Jakarta and then we have the rest of the country. There's a huge difference in terms of the vehicles that are used maybe in a big city. Most Southeast Asian countries have mega cities, higher income, high value, and then a lot of the other market, which we also need to be able to provide them with some form of mobility which they require, whether it's for employment or trade or education or otherwise. So we need to find what is the right solution for all of these people as well. So this diversity is kind of a critical element that needs to be kept. And specifically, even within the context of diversity, we need to understand, like in a market like Indonesia, the smaller cars, A segment, B segment is around 50% of the market. Then there's another element which is commercial vehicles or light commercial vehicles, which is around 20% of the market. So around 70% of the market is already kind of on a different category, whether it's low income or whether it's actually people who are using it for commercial use. So I think we need to understand what the market is, and this is the diversity aspect. The second is actually some of the strengths that Southeast Asia has to support a lot of this electrification as well. So for example, if we take India or Thailand, they have ethanol as well. So this is something that can also be, for example, worked with a strong hybrid motor, and we can almost create a zero-emission vehicle, depending on, of course, whether it's bioethanol, or it's E85 or E100 kind of blend. So this kind of aspect, utilizing the strengths of each country, can create the right electrification pathway for each country. This is what I kind of personally believe.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get into the question about decarbonization and the pathways that different countries could evaluate. I have that question in mind for you. But just sticking on to the point of that you mentioned about being positive about the opportunities for electric vehicles in the region, could you give us Toyota's views in terms of any sort of quantitative outlook for electric vehicle adoption in the region over the next 10 years, for example, within this decade? And what are Toyota's plans for EVs in the region?
So we are bullish in terms of, yes, electric vehicles will grow within Asia itself and within Southeast Asia specifically. So we are already introducing EV vehicles. In fact, I hope some of you may have seen we have the BZ4X, which we launched officially in Indonesia yesterday, and we have the vehicles also running in Bali. We also have other vehicles that we are currently kind of trialing. We're doing some pilot tests even in Jakarta, for example, or in other markets to test the market and understand where it makes most sense. So we will steadily introduce EV vehicles within all of our Asian markets. But we also need to develop the capacity. So One specific aspect that we look at is, even if we look at BNEF's assumption in terms of the economic transition scenario by 2030, so around 10% can become a battery electric vehicle. But even that 10%, we should look at where it's easier to adopt the battery electric vehicle. For example, if we use it in luxury is obviously an area that is easier for people to switch, maybe in terms of their second car or they have home charging. So that's kind of an easier area. Another area is, for example, even this kind of island mobility, where the infrastructure can be dedicated. So we can have point-to-point infrastructure, making it easy for people to utilize maybe electric vehicles, as long as we can get renewable energy like on source. And then the third element is, for example, on fleet. We can look at point-to-point fleet transportation. So in these areas, we see some steady growth. But we think that will still be around 10%. So we still have the majority, and rather than leaving that as a traditional ICE, we should electrify that as well. And we see different segments. For example, fuel cell will start making more headway. We think plug-in hybrids and hybrid electric vehicles are also good pathways to decarbonize. And there's also alternative energy, like we were mentioning with biofuels, B40 in Indonesia or E85 in India. These kind of markets can also be integrated, and we can kind of decarbonize as quickly as possible. In terms of specific timings, I'm afraid I am not at liberty to say, but I think you can understand why. But we are very bullish in terms of how we can decarbonize, especially in terms of kind of EVs at certain segments and certain business models, and then electrified vehicles for the rest.
You brought in a couple of points from the initial discussions about the economics not really there for some of these new technologies, and the decarbonization pathways also being reliant on the energy system. So these are some of the big challenges. So let's focus on the decarbonization angle for just a bit more. What are some of the biggest challenges from a company's perspective when you look at it? You also have long-term sustainability targets and decarbonization goals. And probably sometimes you have to make the choice of what's the best drivetrain to drive down emissions over the long term. So when you look at it, what are those big challenges that you grapple with in the region? And what are some of the ways you think governments as well as companies can then overcome these challenges?
Yeah, thank you. So I think the critical element when we talk about decarbonizing transport is to focus on the first word, which is decarbonizing. And when it comes to decarbonization, there is no single pathway to get there. As I mentioned, we have a very diverse kind of ecosystem. There's many people who utilize mobility for various purposes. So how do we actually provide the right mobility source, which is maybe greener and cleaner? This is kind of how we look at this. And specifically, if we look at the electrified, different vehicles, each of the electrified vehicles have some strengths, and each of them also have some challenges. So even if we look at battery electric vehicles, we still see a lot of the energy source, which is still not renewable, or we look at fuel cell, and still the cost of infrastructure is a bit high, or we look at plug-in hybrid, still we have behavior where people don't plug it in appropriately and use it more as a normal hybrid, and we have hybrid which still utilizes some fossil fuel. But all of them do achieve the objective of decarbonization. So the critical element is how do we speed up and scale up greener technologies as quickly as possible. So Toyota has at least the luxury of having all of the technologies. We have fuel cell electric, battery electric, plug-in hybrid electric, and hybrid electric vehicles. And we will launch all of these vehicles and allow, of course, the customer to scale up. And we think if we do that, and this is a very critical point, carbon is cumulative. So what we need to do is we need to reduce the carbon as quickly as possible in every single source. And we also need to understand with the diversity of the markets, for some vehicles, maybe a certain segment or a certain powertrain may work. For some other segments, another powertrain or another technology may work. So we need to be able to provide each of these technologies to the customers and let the customer choose what makes sense. So we call this the multiple pathway approach. And the multiple pathway approach is really this approach where we are trying to say, we have all these technologies, they're all green, rather than focusing on maybe a single technology that can reduce maybe 10%, why don't we also look at the remaining 90% and try to decarbonize everywhere? So this is what we do look at specifically here in terms of decarbonization. And one small point I wanted to add, very specifically, we also need to look at people's behavior. So Toyota is also doing, or Toyota Mobility Foundation has some programs where we are getting people to take public transport, or we are creating first mile, last mile mobility innovations to get people to get onto a train or a metro. So this kind of behavior is also important. We need to start getting people to use more shared mobility or more public transport. These are also things that actually Toyota supports.
Sure. So we have a couple of questions again about this in terms of emissions and decarbonization. Especially, we talked a little bit about, I would say, the tank-to-wheel emissions at the tailpipe level, how to reduce it. And you also mentioned about life cycle emissions. So we have a couple of questions about emissions from battery manufacturing and as well as manufacturing of other technologies that go into greener vehicles. So what are some of the efforts that you think automakers should do or can consider to reduce emissions from a life cycle perspective for some of these new technologies?
Yeah, I think that's a very important and very good question. So maybe, first of all, we need energy throughout the process, whether it's in the, getting the raw materials or actually manufacturing or including in the supply chain, in the distribution of the vehicle, in the usage of the vehicle, and the end of life. So one of the starting points is how do we encourage renewable energy growth as quickly as possible and make it economically competitive for the people. We have some initiatives where we are trying different kinds of renewable energy programs as well. The other thing is we need to start looking, when it looks at life cycle, for example, our R&D is looking at when we are designing the vehicle, how can we make it easier for circular economy-based kind of manufacturing and utilization as well. We're looking at refurbishment to be able to somehow extend the vehicle as much as possible, of course, with lower carbon. So we're doing these kind of solutions as well. And we're doing things like, for example, utilizing kenaf, which is a material available in Indonesia, as a possible alternative to plastic. So this kind of technological advancement is always going on, and including in the battery. Toyota's battery, for example, the lithium-ion batteries, even after 10 years, we believe the degradation is only around 10%, which is because we have managed to sell, and this is something that's not understood, we've sold over 20 million electrified vehicles, a lot of them hybrid, but which allows us to be able to actually also improve our battery technologies. So this is one of the areas in terms of the development process. And we're also working on the manufacturing. So we have a net carbon zero target for all manufacturing by 2035. So we are now already doing a lot of things. For example, in our factories, it's kind of interesting, and at some point in time, I hope you guys get a chance to visit it. In our plants, we try to reduce electricity by using gravity. We call it karakuri, where we utilize, for example, the gravity to move the parts. This kind of way to eliminate energy utilization as well. So we need to use all of our innovation throughout the life cycle to be able to reduce the actual usage. And by looking at life cycle action and focusing on decarbonization, I think we have a better opportunity to reduce carbon today in terms of solutions as well.
Sure. On manufacturing itself, so we heard President Jokowi talk about placing Indonesia in the center of the electric vehicle manufacturing ecosystem globally. So when Indonesia or other Southeast Asian countries are looking at this opportunity into the future, what do you think are some of the factors that they should consider to create a globally competitive EV ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem in the country?
Yeah, so thank you for that. I think when we're thinking about the competitiveness, maybe there's two elements that we need to think about. One is cost, and the second is the quality. These are the two elements that probably need to go into developing this ecosystem. When it comes to cost, at the moment, still a lot of the market is very fragmented, and as I explained, a very diverse market. So there is a necessity for more freer trade, which allows maybe all of the markets to kind of group the demand, and potentially utilizing the strengths of each market, we can have different electrified parts. Just typically as an example, all of our electrified vehicles, whether it's battery electric or fuel cell electric, plug-in hybrid electric, or a hybrid electric vehicle, have the same components. They have the battery, they have the transaxle with motor, they have a PCU. So there's the possibility that we can kind of utilize the strengths of each of the markets, whether it's in electronics, in manufacturing, in raw material, and create an ecosystem across. But they require some cooperation and allowance of free trade. In terms of the quality, we really have to work on the human resources development. So this is an area that we've been working on, including with some state-owned enterprises, for example, in Indonesia, to level up the capability of battery manufacturing, or in terms of the electric or electrified part manufacturing, using IoT and DX as well. So I think it's really about cost and quality, but these are areas that we can definitely work on.
Cost and quality. Let's end our conversation there. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
Please welcome to the stage Sal Gordon, Head of School at Green School Bali, and Nicole Scoble-Williams, Partner and Global Future of Work Leader at Deloitte, for a conversation with Malika Kapoor, Deputy Global Editor, Bloomberg Live.
Sal, Nick, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here. We're here to talk about education and employment. And before we get started, I want to remind all of you in the audience that you can participate. We'd love you to participate, so make sure you send in your questions using the QR code on the back of your badge. And we do have a school principal here, so he will get upset if you don't pay attention and you don't answer questions.
It's time for everyone to put their phones down and start paying attention.
There you go. We have a principal here, so you have been warned.
Yeah.
So education and employment, two things that were really affected terribly and acutely by the pandemic. And I'm going to begin with you, Nick. I mean, it's important to talk about this because we really have to think about how we can best prepare the youth of today to contribute actively to the workforce for tomorrow, which has changed dramatically. So let me begin by asking you, is there a gap between education and employment today, and where is that gap?
Great question, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and engage in this important conversation with Sal and yourself. The gap is very real. I think all of us in the room recognize that. We are seeing the headlines with things like the Great Resignation, quiet quitting. We are seeing 75% of employers saying, I cannot find the talent I need that have the right combination of technical skills and human capabilities. And the gap isn't just around the skills and capabilities. The gap is around what students, workers, employers are looking for, expect, and desire out of work. I mean, the LinkedIn data and research is showing that less than 20% of job postings today are for remote jobs. But more than 50% of applications are for those remote jobs. So a clear signal that there's a disconnect. The thing that I think is most perplexing when we think about bridging this gap right from early education through to the workforce is what we are seeing around the importance of the potential and passion in our students and workers. Deloitte recently did research around a skill-based organisation approach, and we had only 18% of business leaders and only 26% of workers say that they are currently utilising the skills and capabilities of their workforce to their fullest potential. So I think what we need to be thinking about is how do we bridge this transition from education to the workforce in a way where we are unleashing that potential, not just at entry, but moving forward for sustainability.
Of course, and I want to talk about the potential aspect in a minute. But before that, Sal, you run the Green School here in Bali. It's a young school, but in the few years that it's been around, it's developed a phenomenal global reputation. And I personally know families from around the world who have decided to send their children here. What does your school do differently?
Well, primarily, we're closing that gap that we're talking about now. We've been able to create a new model of education outside of a traditional model of education where we know that the world is changing so fast, exponentially fast, with increasingly complex challenges for the future. And I'm talking about children walking into the future here. We're in an amazing room with some amazing change makers here, but if education isn't a part of moving together forward, we're not going to get anywhere. So we've been able to create a different model of education that involves skill-based, values-based learning. It involves learning for now and being able to do something with your learning now, rather than just learn for an exam, to activate your learning and to embed skills, life skills and values into our young future leaders of this planet, to be able to make a difference to the world now with their learning, but to move into the future as a change maker. Sorry, but the old education system, and probably this room's a little bit different, the old education system educated change takers.
Not change makers.
Yeah, cultures that accepted change upon them. The future is going to demand our youth of today, the adults of the future, to be able to make change in their life, in their companies' lives, in their families' lives, in their governments' lives. There is no moving forward together without having education in the room.
But Sal, it's very, it's a great idea to say we want to create change makers, right? How do you do that on a daily basis in school? What are you doing to ensure that the kids who graduate from the Green School are at least equipped to be change makers?
I'm just going to hold the stage.
No, I'm coming back to you in a minute,
First of all, when I went to school, I was taught a lot of information. We probably all taught a lot of information. With that information, we were asked to memorise it and then regurgitate it for an exam. And that was apparently an education system. That was apparently your learning journey to go out into the real world.
Yeah, the rote learning. We've all been there.
So the world's a completely different place now if you haven't looked outside, in terms of information, technology, climate challenges, societies and everything like that. You can embed skills and values-based learning into any age group learning experience and get the same normal knowledge-based learning outcomes at the end. So instead of doing, right now I'm missing an event called Sustainable Solutions at Green School Bali. And it's an event that our high school students create, curate, and then hold workshops, facilitated workshops, activities, all sorts of awesome sustainability initiatives run by students. And the learning that goes into preparing for an event like this, bigger than an event like this. Trust me, there's going to be 1,000 people at Green School Bali today celebrating sustainability. That's real learning, and they can learn all sorts of skills and values.
Let's talk about the pandemic for a moment, because God knows that's had a huge impact on the way we work. So Nick, I want to come to you with that. What is the lasting impact of the pandemic on the future of work? There have been so many. I mean, you touched upon it earlier, remote working is one, but let me ask you this. I mean, if there was one change that you hope will stay forever, what is that one change?
Putting the human dimension at the center of everything and anything we are thinking about around work, workforces, workplaces.
So how should that happen? How can an employer make sure that that's what they do?
Paying attention to the fact that the pandemic has created a moment for workers to reevaluate what's important to them in their lives, what that means to what they need, expect and desire out of their work. So, for example, we have 40% of the workforce looking to change jobs. We have 53% of women more stressed now than they were a year ago. We have 48% of millennials saying, we are ready to leave our jobs. We are burned out. There are things more important to us. So I think this is a moment where we need to really drive collective action between government, private sector, civil society, and say, how are we going together to bridge this gap around what businesses need, as well as what workers are telling us that they're looking for moving forward. Putting humans at the centre, looking beyond just, for example, what workers have done in the past, their accomplishments. How do we look beyond that and say, as Zoe was saying, how can these individuals contribute to the long term, those human capabilities, the ability to learn, unlearn, the ability to tackle and resolve those wicked problems ahead of us today. Everything about putting that human dimension at the centre by design, which I think is something that hasn't always been the way we lead the way as we're thinking about preparing for the future.
And you could just take the word work away and substitute it with education,
Yeah.
for everything Nick just said.
Turned on its head, right? Because of the pandemic, we had kids out of school for months in certain parts of the world. Yeah, yes, exactly. So, what do you think will be the lasting impact of the pandemic on education? What did we lose? What sort of worries you about that? And what was the opportunity? What's good about it?
Yeah, I think you never miss your water till your well runs dry. And we in education in schools missed community, we missed that human essence of education, we missed the opportunity for students collectively to be together, to learn together. Learning sitting at home, I bet you there's a whole heap of parents here that became the teachers of their students, and they got an insight into an education system that's been in a time capsule for 100 years.
I did,
Probably
it was not
sitting
easy.
there at home, how many people sitting there at home and going, wow, I learnt the same thing when I was a kid. Did you ask yourself, why are they still learning the same thing when the world is a completely different place?
Yeah.
Isn't education, the purpose of it is to prepare children to be adults in the future? So doesn't the future then dictate the education systems that need to be created?
Absolutely.
So we miss that. We miss that community essence. We miss that collaborative, collective thinking, problem solving. We miss being together. We miss being in nature. Green School Bali is a beautiful natural campus. But we learnt a lot through COVID. We learnt how students learn best. People are learning differently all of the time. They're learning online, okay, but they're learning together at home with their families. Education for us, and I think Green School Bali was able to get through COVID by realising that it was skills and it was values rather than knowledge that was getting us through not just a pandemic, but getting us through a really difficult time in education.
I'm going to request you all to keep your phones handy because I'm going to come to a polling question in just a moment. But before that, Nick,
we'll mark you on we'll take grades on the participation.
That's right, very few A's being handed out here. Nick, I want to go back to your idea about a student's potential, right? Now, gauging somebody's potential, that's not something you can see on a CV. So is the CV still relevant?
The CV can still be relevant. However, we need to be using it to ask new questions for this new world of perpetual disruption, expecting and assuming that what we're looking for and needing today will inevitably change tomorrow, 2 years, 3 years and beyond. In Deloitte's 2021 Global Human Capital Trends Research, executives told us their #1 priority to navigate future disruptions was the ability of their people to adapt, reskill and assume new roles. So I like to think about it as we are looking at every candidate as if they are an accomplished athlete in one sport. And we are looking at their suitability for the Olympic team, but we don't know what sport they're going to compete in. So we are not as interested in how many championships or gold medals do they bring today. We are looking for things like their work ethic, their training discipline, that ability to learn, unlearn, to team, to lead within a team setting. These are the new questions that we need to be asking for in looking at the CV today. So provided we are looking at the CV with that lens of future forward thinking, I think it has a really important role to play. It's the mindset on what are we using it for that really is the differentiator.
Sal, to prepare students that somebody like Nick wants to employ, the student who is versatile, who's adaptable, who's nimble, that's well and good, but at the same time, and as a parent myself, I still want my kids to know calculus, and I still want my kids to know, I don't know how handy that is actually, but
I don't know. I'm a maths teacher in calculus.
Yeah, okay, so maybe not calculus, but I want them to learn, to still have a regular curriculum. So how do you blend that at the Green School, that they have a regular curriculum, but you're also working on creating the workforce that somebody like Nick wants?
Yeah, we do have a really highly developed curriculum that has a lot of components that are traditional in terms of mathematics and literacy and the sciences. So it's really about designing diverse learner pathways. The students can do calculus and they can do organic chemistry and things like that, but they can also jump into different project-based learning opportunities. I think project-based learning in general is something that combines integrated opportunities to learn different things, knowledge, skills, and values. You know, when we're talking about skills too, I was just thinking, I mean, it's all about skill-based learning. That's how you do it. You need to integrate skill-based learning. But these aren't new skills that we're talking about. You know, we're talking about collaboration, communication, creativity, adaptability. You know, it's funny that we have to actually start talking about these now, because those skills are why we're here today, you know, holding a mic live around the world, flying around the world everywhere. These skills aren't new to human society and the human being itself. Somehow they just got forgotten in terms of an education system. So we've been really sort of resetting the button around what's needed for the future. And what's needed for the future are those skills: critical thinking, collaboration, adaptability. You just embed experiences that bring those skills to light in a student. You know, they're innate human skills. That's why we climbed out of the trees and got out of the caves. It's why we're such a successful species on this planet. It's time to educate for those skills, because that's the way forward for a sustainable future.
Let's go to our poll now, if we can bring that up.
This is interesting.
This should be interesting.
And the winner is?
So yes, let's, the one who's getting an A is who's the Eager Beaver. So let's get our polling question up. And it's about the workforce of the future. You can use the QR code that you're seeing right now to, there you go. And the question is, the workforce of the future needs ESG knowledge, to be nimble and adaptable, a clear taxonomy to work within, or early education on sustainability. We're going to give it a few seconds just for the results to settle down. And there we go, 65% say to be nimble and adaptable is most important. I actually think, I mean, I'm surprised that no one has picked a clear taxonomy to work with, because sometimes I think you do need a framework to know what you're expected to do. Okay, I'm going to let you all react. Nick, to be nimble and adaptable, is that what you expected?
Well, the first thing I would ask our audience is, put your hand up if you had to think twice about what one of these matters most. Because my expectation is that all of these are important to all of us. And there will be some days when some of them are more important to us than others. But most of us are trying to tackle all of these things at once, every single day, trying to think about that bridge between education and employability. And so for me, I'm rather interested that the audience has really, you know, pulled on that nimble and adaptable, perhaps, as I said, similar to what we saw in our human capital trends research, that if we had to choose one thing, it is that adaptability. But for me, you can see ESG is still important, early education is still important. And so for me, we must recognize that just because nimble and adaptable may have more of the audience votes here, doesn't take away the fact that we all need to tackle these all at once together. And that, again, don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's where it's that multilateral system that's so critical. Every one of these things that we see here needs that collective action between the government, private sector, and civil society. How about you, Sal? Does this surprise you?
No, it's pretty cool. I think, you know, when I deal in adaptability and I help teams of teachers create opportunities for students to develop resilience and adaptability. And, you know, when I look at that, I think probably people have thought and looked at adaptability in terms of a holistic sense of where you don't just sort of adapt to something. You don't just, you know, oh, great, I've adapted. You've got to go through a series of different, using a series of different skills, whether it's, you know, critical thinking, again, a collaboration. You know, we're going to adapt to something. We don't just instantly adapt. So, you know, it seems to me that being nimble, you know, agile and being able to move quickly and change direction, but how you change direction, how you go about adapting is very important to me. You know, sustainability, I'll just say, if sustainability isn't part of how global organisations, how government education systems and how international independent school education isn't, if sustainability isn't a core value within all of those educations, we're not going to get to a sustainable future.
Now, Gen Z, millennials, they have a different idea about success, right? I'm pretty sure salary isn't at the top of their list. So this is a question for both of you because you are dealing with the youth. What is at the top of their list?
I love this question. We often think right now salary is not at the top of the list. It's very complex. So let me tell you what we know about what is important. So in Deloitte's recent 2022 Gen Z and Millennial survey, millennials and Gen Zs told us they're deeply concerned about the state of the world. We know things like climate, things like aligning their personal values are becoming important. They told us that increasingly important is their mental health, their well-being, but they told us the number one issue on their mind in general right now is financial stability. 30% said they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they are stressed about covering their living expenses. But let me show you how this plays out in terms of the choices they're making about employers that they're choosing and employers that they're leaving. The choices Gen Zs and millennials are making to leave an employer, they told us the number one reason is pay. The number two reason is mental health. The number three reason is burnout. Very different to the choices they're making about what employer do I want to go and join. Number one, work-life balance. Number two, learning and development opportunities. And number three, pay. So pay has become table stakes. And if we are thinking that offering very generous financial incentives is going to be enough to attract Gen Z and millennial, right now, most likely not. We're going to need more. So I think we need to be understanding there is a nuance between what is important in life more broadly. Financial stability is absolutely critical. And then how that translates to the choices being made about will I leave my employer and will I join this new employer?
We do have some great questions that have come in from the audience. And Sal, here's a really good one for you. How can the innovative practices at the Green School be democratized and scaled to work for the poorest of the poor?
Yeah, awesome question. Look, we know there's two major problems in education right now, and one's the access to education. Gender equity and access is definitely one, and probably just, you know, the need to reset and update, revolutionise education. Well, what we've had the opportunity at Green School over 14 years is to create a whole new model outside of limitations and restrictions, and a lot of what we do can be scaled within any type of school. I mean, I'll give you an example, a case example. Our school has created its own recycling centre as a part of the learning program. Imagine if every school in Denpasar or every school in New Delhi had created its own recycling program, where the school actually learns by doing and creating recycling systems within its community. So one, that's an easy one. Let's think about waste, let's think about water, let's think about energy, let's think about access to all of those things and embed them into a learning program wherever you are, whatever school. Why do we keep teaching the same thing over and over again to a group of, you know, our future leaders that are going to go out into the world and go, where are we now? You can actually scale basically everything that Green School Bali's created into any type of school model.
And there's one more great question which had just come up, and that one's for you, Nick. And the question had said that earlier in the year, we were talking about the great resignation, quiet quitting. In the last few weeks, we've seen some of the biggest companies in the world, you know, have mass layoffs. What's your reading into this? What's going on?
I think a lot of employers right now are a little bit anxious about some of the instability we're seeing in the market and are looking at some of these quick decisions. What I often turn my mind to is, what about those 97 million new jobs that the World Economic Forum told us are going to be created by 2025 with humans, machines, and algorithms working together? What do we need to do today, regardless of what is ahead of us in terms of the financial instability? We need to be thinking today about what we need to do to weather the storms of possible recessions and make sure that we are positioned and everybody is positioned to succeed and thrive in the green and digital economies, because our need to do that isn't going away. So I feel we need to more look at how do we use the current labour market dynamics and challenges as an opportunity to look for new ways to tackle some of these other concerns we have around the financial instability.
We have 1 minute left, so 30 seconds. One question for both of you. Sal, your vision for the classroom of the future.
Fun, engaging, connected to nature, meaningful, high-tech, low-tech, connected to your community, with parents, organisations, companies from all around the community, all around the world engaged in a learning program.
I want to go back to school again.
Come and see me. Come and see me at Green School Bali. We've got a new model. You'll love it.
Nick, your vision for the workforce of the future.
It would have to be humans at the centre to pave the path for a future that is sustainable, equitable and inclusive for all.
Nick, Sal, thank you very much for your time and for joining us. Thank you all for being a great
Thank you.
audience.
Makasih banyak.
We are going to take a quick coffee break, so please join us outside, but don't go too far. We're going to be back here in just a couple of minutes for an afternoon of excellent programming. So yeah, please enjoy your coffee, but come right back. Thank you.
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. Our program will begin now. Please welcome to the stage Raymond M. Lawler, CEO, Heinz Asia Pacific, and Chintan Ravashia, Citi's business leader, Southeast Asia at Arab, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel.
I've been told it is still Salamat Pagi because it's 11:20 in the morning. I think 12 it's Salamat Siang, is that correct? Salamat Pagi to everybody. We're back here at the Bloomberg CEO Forum, so thanks so much for sticking around. I hope you had a good coffee and a little bit of a break. We're going to get the conversation going. Obviously, you just heard the announcer introduce our guest. Here is Chintan Ravashia, the Sustainable Cities Business Leader for Southeast Asia for the Arup Center. Thanks so much for joining us, and also Ray Lawler, the CEO of Hines Asia Pacific, the property investment and management firm. Let's talk about new cities and sustainable cities. And I want to start because obviously we're in Indonesia, and what's happening in Jakarta, the city is sinking, we all know. And I think 40% of Jakarta, the capital, is under sea level. And in some parts of northern Jakarta, it's sinking 11 inches a year. It's obviously overtaxed. And they're going to build the new capital, or the plan is at least to build the new capital in East Kalimantan, Nusantara, I believe it is called. So maybe I can begin, Chintan, with you. What are the opportunities, but also the challenges when you have a clean slate? You can go and build a city for the next however many centuries from scratch. I mean, there's some environmental issues, but there's also a chance to really do it sustainably.
Yeah, no, thanks for the start on that one. So I have to say, we started helping Indonesia on planning the new capital city pre-pandemic. And that time we were helping Bapenas to think about what that broad vision should be, which is the planning authority for Indonesia, for those of you who don't know. And we started off with the basic premise. We said we had to take everyone on board to think about the new city as the first capital city to be planned in the climate emergency era. And now we can say the first capital city to be planned in climate emergency era and a post-pandemic world. Post-pandemic, let's call it. And it has to feel, breathe, probably look, operate differently than any of the other cities we currently live in or have lived before, because it has to be different. But we don't have a choice. So that's where our premise started. But what's interesting, I think, and talking about what you just highlighted in terms of what that sustainable future could be, beyond the environmental concerns was the social sustainability. So a small anecdote was we did a whole workshop with 120 ministry representatives in Indonesia, in Jakarta, and we started with the UN SDG goals. What is interesting was that the aspect that people picked up was actually not in the UN SDGs, it was identity. What should be the identity of my future capital? And we actually had to add another slice in the UN SDGs to think about what the identity of the city of my future capital should be. So you can see it's social sustainability.
So what will win out? I mean, there's those 17 sustainable development goals by the UN, right? There's everything from socioeconomic to sustainability as far as climate change and environmental impact and the like. But you're saying there's an added element here. There's a cultural element as well.
Absolutely, cultural element. And that's where because in the end, a city is always successful. When we think about cities for 50 years, 100 years to come, the city is successful when you own, as citizens, you own that city of yours. How do you measure the ownership of a city is a really interesting one, and that's where the identity comes in, the cultural aspects come in, the uniqueness of your capital comes in, beyond the environmental concerns. Is absolutely vital to think about what that future is going to be, whether that little stream that runs through that part of Kalimantan is going to be a massive river in 20 years' time, flooding the place. We've got to think about all of those things. But beyond that, it's the emotional part of the city.
Ray, what does a sustainable city mean to you? Is that sustainable profits for the big towers, or is it sustainable water recollection? Is it sustainable employment? What is a sustainable city from your experience?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I just want to say how great it is to be here in the backdrop of the G20 and speaking with you, Stephen. It's an honor to be with you too, Chintan. Thank you very much for that. I think it's really threefold, what we're seeing throughout the firm. You know, one is climate, two is affordability, and three is a convergence of the product types and the future of work. You know, Hines is a global firm. We're in 300 cities across the world. We're in 29 countries, and we have over 90 billion of assets under management. So we're in a pretty good position, I think better position than most, to see these trends around sustainability, the future of work in cities. And so what we're seeing is a lot of talk around carbon, and there are specific things we're doing about that. We're seeing a lot of talk about affordability and what that actually means. And then the future of work. We're in a way, we were talking earlier, we're living in the future, because if any of us have children or we have our young folks that work for us, they are growing up or living in a very different time. They're digital natives, they've grown up with COVID, they're used to Zoom screens, and the collision of the home and work, and the collision of the physical and digital, and the product types all becoming one in a way are certainly trends we're seeing.
Did the pandemic accelerate the transformation to more sustainable cities, or is it throwing a spanner in the works in the sense that the whole equation has changed? In America, I know people are getting out of the CBDs, but in Asia, people are coming back into the CBDs.
Yeah, I think COVID was absolutely an accelerant for what was already happening. One thing is definitely different from Asia than the Western world is the future of work is absolutely about sustainability, flexibility, adaptability, health, and wellness. However, there are three distinct differences. One, in Asia, I think generally people have smaller homes, and so they don't benefit from, they're not able to work from home like they are traditionally in the US or Europe. Two, they take public transportation, and so they're not saving on that commute time like they would in the US or other markets. And then finally, just culturally, what I've found is, the Asian communities value that direct interaction. So we're definitely seeing a shift, but it's not as severe as we're seeing in the US or Europe.
Yeah, I would completely agree on that as well. So at Arup, and like most of the multidisciplinary organizations in planning and design would have done, was assess what the future of CBDs is, the future of cities is. And there is that difference in terms of what you were mentioning, Ray, on how Asia is working culturally different than the other parts, including we were looking at Australia, and we were talking about earlier about how Australia, we had to develop a new report called Superbia, because people were moving suburbs, and what do you think about bringing back people to the CBD? But the cities conversation is important in the whole decarbonization and sustainability story. I mean, just talking about certain facts, we all talk about this number that 50% of the world is currently living in cities and it's just going to grow. But 75% of emissions, 70% of the emissions come from cities, of which 75% come from built environment and transport. And we heard Toyota speak earlier about the challenges around EVs and transport, and of course the built environment. So we have a lot of responsibility on us to really think about what that future is, because we heard the finance minister talk about carbon pledges. And Indonesia, I live in Singapore, everyone's pledged for the fact that by 2050, 2060 neutrality, understand. But in next 7 years, by 2030, the countries have decided to pledge that they will peak emissions. Less than 7 years from now, if the country is going to peak emissions, which means you're doing something dramatically different, that in 2031, 1st of January, you are emitting less carbon than the day before. Now that is profoundly a massive challenge for developers.
So the work doesn't start in 2030, it started 10 years ago.
Had to start 10 years ago. So yeah, that's where we are. And we can only talk about, I always talk about the fact that sustainability is not enough. If 2050, we are neutrality, which means we are still messing up the planet between now and 2050. So you got to think about nature positive, regenerative planning, and regenerative buildings, for that matter, of our future.
So from a city perspective, and both of you can answer this, what is the top priority to at least move the goalposts on these goals? Indonesia has a goal of net emissions zero by 2060. Yeah. Ray, you also, I saw on your website, Heinz has set a target of 2040 for net zero goal across all the buildings that you either develop or invest in by 2040.
Correct. Heinz has set a goal to be operationally net zero by 2040. We've taken some pretty proactive steps across the world. One, we've appointed but the industry's first carbon officer.
What does he do?
So he basically wakes up in the morning thinking about carbon, how we can reduce it operationally, and how we can reduce it from a development perspective. We call that embodied carbon. So that's his main job. Other things we're doing is we're looking at unique technologies. We have a technology called T3, and T3 stands for timber, technology, and transit. And the reason it's important is if you build with mass timber, by definition, you're reducing the embodied carbon because it stays in the timber itself. And so that's on the embodied side. So timber and then transit, if you build an asset or a building close to transit, by definition, a person is burning less carbon to get to that asset because they're using mass transit and walking to the asset. And then finally, technology, as we've talked about the physical and digital world colliding and the technological advances that we need to integrate in our assets, that's equally important to get to that goal of net zero.
Now, Chintan, I'm going to get to you to answer that question, but I'm going to play the devil's advocate, and I think I know the answer to this, but timber? Hello? Timber? That takes forests. Deforestation.
Yes, the key on timber is to grow it sustainably, and they're doing that all over the world. You know, there's sustainable forests in Southeast Asia, New Zealand, and throughout the world.
Sustainable is the key, not the deforestation
key.
that might happen in Borneo because of the new capital. You're gonna dispute that because it's plantations mostly, right? But there has been deforestation and habitats destroyed
in the past. So that's where the term regenerative comes. We got to think about the plan that what's been damaged before, we turn that into something much more positive for the future.
So again, my question earlier was about the priorities as far as reaching those goals, and that the world, as we all know, the COP and everything, we're behind the timeline here. So what should be the priorities for, say, for example, Indonesia to hit its target?
Well, I would say Indonesia for sure, but I would say for all countries, to be honest. I've recently been fascinated by 3Ds. Now, there's always this thing, 3Ds, 6Ds, etc. But the 3Ds that I've been fascinated about is decarbonization, digitization, data. We spoke about data as a new oil. And probably the most interesting one is disclosure. We should create mechanisms where we can disclose the carbon assessment, the carbon measures, the metric. How do we know we are successful by 2030 in terms of peak emissions? What is that baseline? We can say, yes, we measured the carbon and this is how it is and this is a scope 3, et cetera, et cetera.
What is the answer to that?
It's an ecosystem response that we need to give, and we are just one of the players in that ecosystem. We need to work with the government top down. You can't just have a vision, you got to think about implementation plan. The middlemen is what we are, or middle people is what we are. But then there's also the bottom-up citizens.
Can a city be built from the ground up, net emissions zero? Is it possible?
There are various ways of calculating
offsets,
that.
Obviously.
Well, there are offsets, and you can probably do something net zero in terms of a city design, but then you got to think about what the operational carbon is going to be. So it is not complicated at this point in time, I would say, but it is possible in the future.
What's been your experience in the places? You're not in Indonesia per se, but in the other areas, in China in particular, they've had an opportunity to think outside the box when they built the CBDs, whether it's Lujiazui in Shanghai, other cities across China are building new central business districts aside from their urban core. They can start from a clean slate, so to speak.
Right, I think we're looking at all sorts of technologies, both in the sustainability aspect, but also the affordability. You know, one thing we're doing specifically in Australia is we have Australia's first all-electric building. And the reason that's important, we talk a lot about carbon, but we also should be talking about methane. You know, carbon can last in the atmosphere for hundreds of years, but actually methane dissipates quite quickly. So if you have an all-electric building, you can make an impact quite quickly as well. The other piece is just on affordability. When we talk about ESG, folks do focus on the E, carbon. The S, the social side of it, we think that sustainability and affordability, you talked about opportunities and crisis. You know, they are definitely, without question, the crisis of our lifetime. But at the same time, they're an opportunity of our lifetime. And on the affordability side, we're looking at co-living. We're looking at prefab. We're looking at modular construction. We're looking at net positive affordable units that actually put energy back into the grid that then subsidize the housing itself.
What kind of standards or, dare I say, some sort of agreements would you look for from G20 or these kind of bodies? Obviously, they've had the meetings, the COP meetings as well, and there's been, you know, every nation in the world has their own vested interests and the likes, and sometimes they're oftentimes competing. What would you like to see come out of a meeting like G20?
I think I'll press on the point I made earlier, which was there needs to be a standardization of disclosure. If every city or every country can think about a standard way of measuring, and that's where for all those people who would probably know, the scope 3 is the most difficult one to measure, which means you've got to think about where the material came from, where it was built, where it was manufactured, and brought into your country to build your city or your country. That standardization is vital as hell, to be honest. I mean, we are currently helping Asian Development Bank to help Nusantara to think about that standardization of data right now, because Nusantara understands data, primary in carbon calculation, in people's livability, all of that. Absolutely.
As a property developer and as a investor, you must be looking at data extremely closely, or are you?
Everything is about the data. You know, we simply can't be accountable for sustainability if we can't measure it. And we as a firm do not want to greenwash. And it's incredibly important to measure and hold ourselves accountable. And to your earlier question, Stephen, what do we hope to get out of the G20? It's not just about the governments. It's about our occupiers. It's about the people of the city. It's our investors. It's developers. It's consultants. It is literally everybody coming together to solve, like I said, really the crisis of our lifetime.
Don't you need top-down? There I go. I'm getting, I'm taking the top-down approach to it. Don't you need a firm hand by the government to say, these are our goals, we're going to reach it, and this is how you can comply? Because an individual company will see it as a tax on their profits, on short-term profitability.
Yeah, I think like anything, you obviously have to have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach that meet. That's the only way we'll have real change.
You want a question from the audience? You guys game?
Sure.
Here we go. Can we get your views on the possibility of setting up clusters? Oh, there goes the question out. What does it say? Set up clusters for innovative green technology to support MSMEs to contribute to climate change and ESG. There's not really a question in there, just clusters for innovative green technology. I think that's what we're seeing in various places throughout Southeast Asia and in Asia, aren't we? It's just every country is a little bit different in their priority for it, right?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I would say, I mean, the view is, yes, positive. we definitely should be having, because you start seeing that when there is a density of creative or innovative clusters coming together to do things in terms of innovation and sharing that. And I said earlier that the success is the ecosystem changing. And for that ecosystem, you need partners primarily. It's super important. We said top-down government, and you spoke about that earlier, the top-down government vision, absolutely vital. But in terms of thinking about then the middle section, the financiers, the funders, all of those people, we need to think about partnerships at that level for that success of implementation.
Well, what's the key element to getting some innovative financing for these initiatives? And actually taking the initiatives from paper to reality? Because you got to fund it.
Yeah, agree. And that's probably what they're going to have a talk about at G20, isn't it, this time? About how do you think about innovative financing and funding for developing nations, think about tackling the idea of climate change, and where do you think that the governments come together to create those clusters to be able to do that further?
For you, when you look at a particular project, obviously financing is key to make your decisions on how much of that project is going to be a sustainable building and the like. Has that equation changed over the last 10 years for you guys?
It's absolutely changed. I mean, and it's changed from every single perspective. One, we've talked about the government, and typically governments now, where in the past, maybe it wasn't the top of mind, now it is. Two, our occupiers, our tenants, our employees are demanding it. And then three, our investors, understand that we cannot build a building that's what we call obsolete upon completion. It needs to be forward-looking. It has to be innovative. It has to be sustainable. And with that, creates real value.
What should be the life cycle of a new sustainable building? I mean, we should probably, like we do old cars, internal combustible cars, we should be retiring older buildings?
Actually, no. No, I'll push back on that. And the reason is there's two components of carbon, as we were talking about. There's the embodied piece, and there's the operational piece. And obviously, the embodied piece is all the new materials that go into that building to create it. And so adaptive reuse is a big opportunity, I think, for any existing city. You know, we're talking about new cities, but existing cities, you know, taking an old building, retrofitting it strategically and sustainably actually has a lower impact on the environment than building a new one.
I'll probably touch on that. Absolutely spot on, because so in COP26, Europe announced that we were going to do a carbon assessment of all the buildings we've done in the last 60 years, from Sydney Opera House to Marina Bay Sands and all the buildings. And 27, we currently, as we're going through, we announced that we've done 1,000 buildings till date, and all that data is free for people to access of what that means for buildings. And 40% of that carbon embodied is sitting in that concrete of your building. And if you pull that down, 40%, and that's something that you want to retain.
And it's amazing some of the technologies that we're seeing out there, you know, being such a big firm and having so much, you know, real estate around the world. You know, we're seeing smart concrete, we're seeing smart glass, we're seeing ways to reduce energy that we haven't thought of before. And those technologies, those innovations, you know, will drive change not only in development but adaptive reuse.
And how do you keep the costs down with the rising commodities globally and the competition for the commodities, which has helped Indonesia's economy, obviously a resource-rich nation, but again, building is not cheap. And Nusantara is going to be, I think it's conservative to say 34, or what was the figure they're talking about? 40 billion, and then up and up.
Yep, no, that's true. I don't have a clear answer to that one, but the fact is that so one thing is having the cost of building the buildings, which can sit with the private developers or private investments. And then there's the other cost, which is providing infrastructure, which has to sit with someone to be able to build that infrastructure, to have that trust in the system that, yes, I'm going to have the metro, yes, I'm going to have the rail, I'm going to have the BRT system, and all of those things. So it's the ecosystem that sits around giving that aspect to the private developer, the private investment to come in. So the cost of both levels.
Is an energy transition a key component here as well? Indonesia relies so heavily on coal, as does China. It's cheap. It's readily available. In the priority list, where is the energy transition? I was mentioning with Sri Mulyani earlier about this story that Bloomberg has about getting pledges from the richer nations for at least a $15 billion contribution for Indonesia's energy transition to renewables.
It's obviously much easier for a city or an individual asset to be operationally net zero if they're drawing energy from a green grid. But as you point out, that's not readily available throughout the world. And so as property owners and developers, you know, we want to create individual mechanisms within the asset to create as much energy as we can to make it net zero, you know, through solars, through renewable, through various smart technologies to not only create renewable energy, but reduce it at the same time while the green grid actually comes online, because it will. It's going to take some time. And that, again, to go back, that's one of the opportunities, I think, for all of us of our lifetimes is really creating the ecosystem of sustainability, because it's tied, it's integrally connected.
I would say there are two ways of looking at it. And coming back again, wearing my city, so the larger country level hat, there'll be bigger top-down approaches, like turning the country or city into complete hydrogen-focused society that changes remarkably everyone's carbon footprint. And then there is this other level, which is looking at development in its own right of how much they can provide it back to the grid. And both will have to work simultaneously. So I think the governments as well as the private players will have to play an absolutely important, vital role to be able to manage that mix of what that future is.
Well, I'd like to turn the next question to perhaps people in the room here as well, as far as where the investment opportunities are. I remember, and I hate to name drop, but many years ago, I think it was at least 10 or 12 years ago, Bill Clinton was in in Hangzhou at an Alibaba event, and somebody asked him, what would you invest in for the next century or whatever? And he said, at that time, solar. He said, I'd put all my money into solar. This was maybe 12, 13 years ago. What are some of the up-and-coming technologies on this theme of new cities, sustainable cities, that either you or you would advise people to look into as an investment? I'm not saying you must invest in this company or this and that, but you know what I mean?
Sure. I mean, I'll speak to that from an Asia-Pacific perspective, but also just, from a Heinz perspective around the world. I mean, we have, currently in Asia-Pacific, 12 developments and 25 projects, and they're in Japan and Korea and China, Singapore and Australia. And the common themes of investing in those assets and those cities are, we're building for the long term, we're doing it sustainably, and we're looking at what the future generation, my kids who are 12 and 14 that have grown up with COVID, what do they think about office space? What does office of the future actually look at? And that, as we're building it, really drives our development process. Because these projects, a city, it takes 30 years. A building sometimes can take 10. It's a long process, and so we do have to look out above the horizon. And so I think anything around sustainability, affordability, innovation will win the day.
You have any calls? Anything?
I'll probably take a bit of a tangent there and add another aspect to it. So when we were planning the capital city for Indonesia, and currently and before that, and alongside, we've also been working with Singapore government on something which is food. And again, Minister spoke about food and energy. And this is my personal belief, that I strongly believe that we need to resolve the innovative way we produce food. Food, again, is another, I think it was 40% of the carbon, and 70% of fresh water goes into production of food right now in the world. If we can think about innovative ways of producing or allowing that and change that, and not having the dependence on aspects and becoming a bit more of an independent response to that, I think we can make our cities a lot more
You got to feed a city, don't you?
Yeah, no choice, right? No choice.
And there is a food crisis exacerbated by geopolitical issues, whether it's Ukraine and the like. We are in an energy and food crisis.
Absolutely. You see some neat technologies in cities, vertical farming, hydroponics, incorporating it in a mixed-use asset. And most of our occupiers just fundamentally like to be close to their food. And I think that's just an incredible opportunity. If I were designing a city, it's something I know you all are considering, and we're incorporating elements of urban farming in many of our assets.
That's an interesting point. So who's driving these suggestions? Does the client come to you and say, I want the most sustainable building, I want rainforests every 20 floors, I want rainwater collection, I want this? Or do you, through the infinite wisdom that you have as a developer, know what to suggest?
Well, I'll start, because our founder, Jerry Heinz, we're a private firm. He founded the firm in 1957, and he had a saying that's always really stuck with me. And he said, our business is about happy tenants paying rent. And it sounds so simple, but when you think about food or urban farming or beekeeping or whatever the case may be, it makes our occupiers happy. And happy tenants tend to pay more to stay.
I don't want beekeeping every 20 floors.
Yeah, but a lot of people do. You'd be surprised to see the amount of beekeeping on roofs in urban cities.
Really?
Yeah.
I could think of better things to do than beekeeping. What's that buzzing going on? All right, let's turn. Wow, we're getting a lot of questions in now. What's your vision for an ideal city? Wow, there's an open-ended question.
Gosh.
Beekeeping?
Well, that'll be good to have bees there, as long as they don't go into my kitchen.
We need bees. I'm not denigrating bees. We need bees.
It's all about pollination and food, right?
Bees.
Go ahead.
I would say, I use a single word, equitable. Equitable city. I think that'll be an ideal city, and equitable in all possible ways. And equitable, and I would say 4 stakeholders in the equity. Human beings, but also nature, flora, fauna. I think we all got to think about all of those 4 stakeholders in that
But that doesn't create winners and losers. I'm the devil's advocate here. If it's all equity.
Well, equitable cities, equity doesn't mean that you don't have competition.
Yeah.
You still have that.
The vision for an ideal city, 3 words that I think we're all talking about. 1 is sustainability, 2 is attainability, and 3 is innovative.
Is there any city in the world, this is another question from the audience and their infinite wisdom, is there any city in the world that you consider most advanced when it comes to sustainability that's already built?
I wouldn't make it so simple by saying giving a city as a name, but there are actions that certain cities have done, or certain citizens have done, or certain players have done in cities which are commendable. Right from massive innovation and technology things that cities have done. I would talk about even the most humblest technologies such as Jakarta during pandemic. They literally, in some parts of the city, drew a yellow line across the city for kids to walk to the MRT station safely because there were less cars. And that was it. More students and more kids and more parents were walking to the MRT station than taking the transport just because someone went and drew a yellow line and put a sign to say, people walking.
Safer.
Safely.
Yes. Who do you think will be the most effective driver of establishing standards for data collection? You again both mentioned data as key, and also ESG policies and auditing procedures. Public, private, or nonprofit sector, who is more incentivized?
It's a fascinating question. I think we right now, and you obviously do too, we have a front row seat because privately we are doing it. We are collecting our data. But publicly, we're being increasingly asked by our investors and municipalities to provide that data. And then the not-for-profit also has an equally important role. So I would say they're not mutually exclusive, all equally important.
Yep. Any final points, gentlemen, that I didn't bring up? I didn't extract the dentist that I am? No?
I would just say, and I said it earlier, we're living in an incredibly unique time. There's a rapid convergence of the product types, the physical and digital world. Everyone's talking about carbon. Everyone's talking about attainability. And that just makes me really excited. And it makes me excited because, as we've said, I think we're in a position now to come together and do something about it.
I'll probably add one last sentence that we got to decarbonize the existing, and we got to think about a nature-positive future. That's what I would say.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our 2 guests, Chintan Ravashia and Ray Lawler. We'll be looking forward to seeing the progress, obviously, on Nusantara, which I believe is supposed to be completed by 2045, right? I'll be 80 by then. I'll come retire there. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Chintan.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ray.
Please welcome to the stage Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs and Investment of the Republic of Indonesia, for a conversation with Bloomberg's Judith Ho.
Good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to Bali. I would like to thank you, Bloomberg, for giving this opportunity. If I may touch a little bit about the growing digital economy, the COVID-19 pandemic has immensely transformed all society. I remember before COVID, that we don't understand that how important, especially myself, about the powerful of digital economy, Then because we cannot move here and there, then we go through digital. So now we are in the stage of very advanced because I can give you one example, our e-catalog, for instance, This is one of the, we promote very much to make Indonesia more efficient and also could less corruption and also could create more job opportunity because we have like $80 billion, $85 billion government procurement. So we can procure local content gradually. This year, I think like 400 trillion, and we'll have plan to go to 1,000 trillion by next year. And Indonesian digital economy is a value like 70 billion gross merchandise value in 2021. This value has grown for 75%. And we're expecting Indonesian digital economy will rise to 4,531 trillion or 300 billion in 2030 from 632 trillion in 2020. This is also because of the number of middle class in Indonesia also growing. I think you can see also our economic growth, like the third quarters, like we grew like 5.72%. Our inflation still maintained or lower now to 5.7%. And if you look at also stock is doing very well. And overall, I think our economy is doing very, very well. And like this morning, for instance, we signed with the B20 over $5 billion US on the intention of people to invest in Indonesia, because the much easier to invest in Indonesia today after we make some, deregulation of our regulation, so make easier for the investor to invest in Indonesia. Also, President Joko Widodo has instructed us to accelerate the digital transformation for the agriculture and ocean-based economy. This is, I think, very important also. We try to make all the activities through digital, like palm oil, for instance, we're going to cover with the digital technology so we can make efficiency here and there. But not only that, I think we can increase our tax, because we understand right now how many hectares, precisely the size of our palm oil. Used to be, we don't know about this. Now we understand. I think we can hike our tax revenue from palm oil maybe around $8 billion for the next 5 to 10 years to come. Indonesia has committed to achieve net zero emission by 2060, and I think we are able to reach a very tough negotiation with the US side the last 1 year. And last night, I think John Kerry phoned me from Sharm el-Sheikh. We already reached the agreement. Hopefully we can announce during the bilateral meeting President Joko Widodo and President Biden on the 15th of November. And Indonesia has also renewable energy potential. We have 437 gigawatt mixed renewable energy. Utilization today only 5%. So the room is so much. But the only issue, you have to look at Indonesia not as a continent country, but as an archipelagic country, because renewable energy a lot in the ring of fire. Sumatra, Java, NTT, and Papua. So that's, I think, the issue. So we are now trying to bring some industry in Java because we have excess capacity 5.2 gigawatt. So then we can, also dedicate the renewable energy to some industry over there. And 2060, the renewable energy-based power generation capacity is expected to be at least 700 gigawatt. Indonesia agrees to work on the Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP, which is I mentioned earlier. And this is, I think, John Kerry told me this is one of the biggest achievements in this agreement. Well, the criteria will make it very clear, anything you advise us, we can say yes. But condition, don't disturb our economic growth, because it's very important. And two, I think have to be affordable technology. And number three, should be timely, the technology. If the technology come in 10 years from now, we need it today. But the last one, any loan you give it to us in about this JETP have to be the interest like developed countries. So then we can get a lower interest on this issue. Otherwise, what's the point for us? Because our carbon emission per capita only 2.3 ton per capita, while America or the developed countries like 14.7 ton. Baseline is 4.5 ton per capita. So 80% of the carbon emission basically contributed by the developed G20 member. Indonesia is the largest producer of palm oil and nickel, and we believe also palm oil can be 50% for, 40% for the food and 60% for energy. So we're going to have clean energy by maybe 2030 or 2040 from this, so we can reduce our crude oil import. Indonesia is currently developing the Kalimantan Industrial Park, Indonesia KIPI. This is one of the largest integrated industry maybe in globally, because it's 132 billion investment. Ongoing right now, the first, on the petrochemical, the first stage of petrochemical, that's $11 billion investment. I think the inauguration of this is going to happen second quarter 2024. But we're going to produce over there also 265 gigawatt hour of energy for EV. So we can produce like 3 million EV from this area. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Indonesia is delighted to host the G20, and I think the preparation nearly done. Been checking here and there, and we are so happy so far. Yes, I think Russia, President Putin couldn't make it, but we prepare for him also to do the teleconference, and then similar also to Zelensky. And G20 summit must be used to showcase the important role of G20 countries in helping find solutions to various global challenges. So we don't want to see just communicate, and nothing happen. Because I went to so many big event like this, too many promise, but nothing happened. So we like to see something that also could, deliver something. So deliverables, I think, should be the concrete one. So like this climate change, for instance, that G20, for instance, been doing this the last 1.5 years, but I'm so glad that we achieved already agreement on that. G20 must give benefit to not only a member state, but also to international. And again, highest appreciation to all stakeholders, organizing committee, and especially to the Bloomberg who organized this, LPS, Pak Purbaya. Without Purbaya involvement in this, I don't think that's going to happen like this. So nice a meeting like this, so nice room. So again, thank you very much to LPS, and thank you very much also to Bloomberg. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Luhut, for that very optimistic speech about Indonesia. It is definitely a great time to be here in Bali. I'm really excited to hear about the JETP deal. Do you mind talking a little more about the call you had with John Kerry? I think we're all really keen to hear more about that deal.
Well, I cannot disclose yet this, because that, I think, my deal last night with John Kerry, that's, I think, announcement. They'll give it after the meeting, President Biden and Jokowi. Leave it to them.
We heard it might be 15 billion. Can you confirm?
I think the size is bigger than that.
You heard it first here. I do want to start with the commodities.
But not only the size of amount of the fund they provide, but I think also this can be a model, globally, because we show to the JETP, the American side, the model could help the developing countries. So you don't look at only from the developed countries, but you have to look at also from the interest of the developing country, which is, I think, win-win solution.
Thank you, Pa. And we know that one of the disagreement was how much authority Indonesia needs to maintain over its own domestic energy policy, even as it takes these funds. How did you actually manage to reach that agreement in the end?
Well, we have a full authority. What do you mean the authority in this country? Because as I said to you, to many people, yeah, we understand the importance of this, this climate change, and we understand also the impact toward the next generation of Indonesia, this climate change. So we have, of course, a responsibility to the next generation people of Indonesia. So we have to set up the policy for the interest of our people. Like I mentioned earlier, our carbon emission only 2.3 ton per capita. So we are much lower compared to other members of G20. If you look at G20, 80% of carbon emission created or contributed by the member of G20. So for us, we prove it, like mangrove restoration, 600,000 hectares. Oh, other countries doing like this, only Indonesia. So now we trying to set up collaboration between the country like Brazil, Indonesia, Congo, who has like 60% of forestry globally. We mix a peatland, mangrove, also others. So that's, I think, the contribution also to reduce the carbon emission. And we have also quite large of the depleted reservoir. So we signed also agreement during the G20 with Chevron. That's again our contribution. So if you ask me, yeah, like EV also we have a target EV. So, and motorbike. Hopefully within 5 years to 10 years to come, we don't, maybe 15 years, we don't produce any more combustion car. So then you will see soon, gradually, we'd like to do it gradually, that more and more EV, more and more motorbike. The President gave instruction very clear also to speed up this process. Because the air quality air in Jakarta, for instance, we have to fix it, by reducing this number, transportation, car and public transportation and like also motorbike and less and less combustion car, I think you can see Jakarta differently than today.
As we already saw around Nusa Dua, we've seen a lot of EVs from Toyota, Hyundai, and also Wuling. We've also heard that Indonesia is planning subsidies for consumers so that to increase the adoption of EVs. How is that going, Pak Luhut?
Well, that's, I think, we look at now, we discuss, how much we spend subsidy, without EV, So then, EV have to be attractive to the people. So we plan now to look at like 7.5 million rupiah per car. So then they can compete with the combustion car because they don't pay gasoline anymore. So they just pay to charging their battery. Charging their battery at home, they can do it at time. So the cost, because we have also oversupply of electricity. So we try to finalize this one. Hopefully within months you can see that one. And that's one, number one. Number two, of course, when the industry building their construction their industry here, we allow them to import their own car. We give them quota for how many years? Maybe 2 years time until they start seeing production domestically. I think we can reduce a lot of subsidy from that. Yeah.
Sorry, the 7.5 million rupiah, is that for one purchase or?
The battery, for the motorbike, we replaced of the battery,
So it's for the conversion of electric
conversion,
motorbikes.
So we have also program, how do we convert the motorbike traditional to the motorbike EV, Yeah, we are trying now, we're doing this one now.
What about in terms of tax cuts for the consumers buying new vehicles, Pak?
Consumer buying what?
Buying new EV vehicles.
Yeah, they have also. They're going to get it. Otherwise, nobody want to buy the EV car, if the price are higher than the combustion car, So, but I experience now that, having EV car cheaper, because you don't buy gasoline anymore. You're just charging at home, So I have one now, EV car, and I ask all my staff, And also the government, I forgot to tell you, the government procurement for transportation next year have to be EV. So that's, I think, encourage people to buy it. When the government do it, and then the people can follow it.
And with this new, huge adoption of EVs, of course, Indonesia is going to become a big beneficiary with our nickel resources. We know Indonesia has been really pushing for the downstreaming policy. What can we expect next from that? What other commodities will we see get
Well,
banned?
we don't say to ban the commodity, but regulate the commodity. So now we had nickel ore. The nickel ore, we'd like to see the downstream. Now, still on the on the iron steel. Even the iron steel, our export last year already nearly $21 billion. And this year, we believe we can go up maybe $28 billion. This help our economy to stabilize, to stabilize our economy. So then we can go to tin, bauxite, copper, palm oil. I think after this G20, President will receive the presentation from us. How do we see the downstream of this? What's going to happen? What kind of regulation they're going to do in order to speed up this process? So that's why I said I'm very optimistic to look at our economy. If our economy 2030 prediction like 3-point-something trillion US dollar GDP, I believe we can go higher than that if we are able to successful the downstream industry, nickel ore and bauxite, tin, and copper. Because copper, their prediction, because of the climate change, they need also carrier of the, for the energy. Copper is the best. So the price is going to be maybe 8 times within 10 years' time. So that's, I think, good for Indonesia. So we are now preparing for all those things.
We do know we have a timeline for the different commodities, like you say, bauxite, tin, and copper. But I mean, we're seeing such huge boost in investment. In the third quarter, foreign direct investments rose 64%, which is a record.
Yeah.
And you've seen the commodities downstreaming also contribute to growth. Is that changing how the government sees this policy? Are you going to accelerate it?
Yeah. Especially like this morning, in B20, some our friend ambassadors say this is like what's called like a state trade. How come it's just signing $5 billion deal only like I don't know how to say in English, like ece-ece, but this is $5 billion. But that's the aura of Indonesia today. So people are so keen to invest in Indonesia because much easier to invest in Indonesia. I mean, the regulation easier, and also we help them, we support them through digitalization, online single submission, for instance. Although we still have some problem here and there, but I think now it's getting better time to time. So it's again. We grew like 63% foreign direct investment, but don't forget about the government procurement, the $115 billion. There's the government procurement and state-owned company. So if both we can, let's say within 2 years' time that we can, procure the domestic good, and then we put it to a catalog. Well, we can grow like 6-7%, maybe 3 years from now. So it depends on efficiency. So efficiency is very important. I mentioned earlier to you about the palm oil, for instance. Yeah, we're not going to bring them to the court, but you have to pay because we understand you lied to us. So I understand next year I will tax you properly, because you hide before your size, your number of production. But today you cannot do it anymore.
Speaking of palm oil, we know that earlier this year, Indonesia shocked global markets by banning the exports of palm oil. Since then, the government has done reforms, and you've also done an industry audit. What did you find from the audit, and what recommendations will you make to the president?
Well, right now, nobody can play around with us, because we understand the system. We've established the system now. Yeah, before they tried to play this and that. Today, no. Look at now, we balance this one, supply, demand. Yeah, we balance this one. So I think we can maintain the price like 850 to 900. So the palm oil producer, they make good money. But you have to remember also, you should maintain, or we have to maintain like 2,500 rupiah, the price of the, palm oil from the local producers. So then, not only the rich people enjoy this one, but also from the small farmer. That's, I think, very important to bring equilibrium, equality in this country. Before, always the big player play around. I said, no. We understand now how much money do you make. I promise you, we don't understand. So that's why we encourage them, hey, in this kind of situation, you should put also your export money in Indonesia. Yeah, make it Indonesia. So then strengthen our economy, strengthen our currency, strengthen so many things. Not only make money here and then you bring this money outside of Indonesia, unfair, I said. I'm very open on this. Yeah.
How are you going to monitor and also crack down on, like you say, people bringing export earnings back outside
Very
the country?
simple. All the digitalized right now, I can tell you how much your palm oil, for instance, I can say how much you export and what price, because I have all the data, Before they don't use data, today we can use. Yeah, my deputy, they understand very much, There's a company A, their size of their land or palm oil, for instance, like 100,000 hectares, and their yield like maybe 5 tons per capita per hectare, and the production like maybe 5-6 million tons, and they export at what price? Then the government tax you at that price. So not going to be 1 month, maybe every week we're going to tax you, differently, because they're different price.
We do have questions from the audience, and I will read this one. Pak Luhut, what is the future of state-owned enterprises in addressing the pandemic? And also, how do you balance this with private sector investments in health?
Well, I think the very complicated issue is about the pandemic, right? So we are able to manage this one. What else? So right now I can tell you, because of the pandemic, for us, for me, yes, this is a big threat at the time. But today, I'm thinking we are lucky to have this one. Yeah, why are lucky? Because of that, we understand the importance of digitalize. Yeah, before we don't, we understand, but important. But during the what you call COVID, wow. Now, when this is there's G20, I talked to the government, now school for 1 week, make it offline. And also people now go to work from home. Before, very hard to do it. Now, this is a common practice. Sometimes we can reduce number of people go to the office, work from home. So that's help us. Now, used to be we import so many pharmaceutical. Today, I should say like 55% we produce domestically. We still have some problem here and there, but I believe within 2 years' time, we can go maybe 80% of the pharmaceutical industry locally produced.
Thank you, Pa. I also know that we're gathered here today for the G20. You mentioned like that you're tired of communicating. That's not the point that that's not the goal that you're chasing. But you spoke about JETP. What other goals and what are your hopes basically for this upcoming G20 Leaders Summit?
What's my hope?
Yes.
Well, let them bring peaceful, Yeah, that's also the role of President Joko Widodo, try to, bridge between, Zelensky, Ukraine, with Putin, and also maybe, to manage, communication between President Biden and President Xi Jinping, and also some other leaders. So, because whatever going to happen in Ukraine, the first victim is the developing countries. Yeah, but now, look at now in Europe. Some people blame us, Yesterday, the interview by the BBC, they said, how do your commitment about renewable energy? I said, hey, look, Germany and Poland, they want to import our coal. So what happened this one? How do you talk about this? While you said, hey, Indonesia have to do this, we did. We are doing now. We take your advice, But then the developed countries still want to import coal from Indonesia. That's a paradox, But I say in this kind of situation, now we are thinking Indonesia first, because you taught us American first. So now say, okay, Indonesia first.
Thank you so much, Pak Luhut. Please give him another round of applause. And thank you so much for...
Well, to all of Indonesian, I would like to share my view. I think it's about time for us. About time for us also to understand or to ask ourselves. This Indonesia is different now, in the last 8 years. We are not a country. We are not just... people thought Indonesia, they can outsmart. No. This country has something now. Everybody said, even Jonathan from BBC said to me, Indonesia is a model. Last night also, John Kerry said to me, it's a model on the climate change, Because we promised. I told them, you don't need lecturing us, guys. I said, I'm talking like this. We know what we have to do. We have also our responsibility to the environment, to the global, to the next generation of Indonesia. So you don't need to lecturing us. Advise us, we thank you so much, because we cannot control everything. But outsmart us, don't worry, not going to happen. Because you know why? The different today, decision-making process in Indonesia, this managed by young people of Indonesia. It's like my deputy, Firman, you stand up, Firman. Firman, look at this Firman, he's the one advised me, because when the president assigned me to tackle about COVID, the first guy that I met, I phoned, is Firman. Firman, you are an economist. And why don't you use your economic model? How do we handle this COVID? I give you 3 days time and brief me. I give the parameter, And he briefed me. If people say this one because of Luhut, no, I'm just mentoring them. Young people like Firman, I have 20 now in my office. So we have to be proud to Indonesia. To all of you, don't talk bad thing about your country. Talk the beauty of Indonesia, that we are heading toward the right direction. And this country is going to be a great country. If people said by 2045, 2050, our economy going to be like $9 trillion GDP, I'm pretty confident that we can reach it. Going to be the 4th largest economy globally, I believe we can do it. As long as we do it like this, as long as we are solid. That's my message to all of you, to our friend foreign people. Don't worry, don't hesitate, invest in Indonesia. If you need our help, don't hesitate, we'll help you. But nobody can dictate Indonesia, and no country can also control Indonesia. I promise you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pak Luhut.
Please welcome to the stage Hendra Chong, CEO at ClickDoctor, and Zig Ronsky, Vice Director at Nidong 315, for a conversation with Bloomberg's One Ha.
Well, that is going to be a very hard act to follow, but we are going to be discussing global health and specifically health here in Southeast Asia, a very important topic. The COVID-19 pandemic obviously focused attention on the need for sustainable and innovative healthcare systems around the world, but particularly in Southeast Asia, where the need is so great Every year, we see more than 70% of deaths attributable to chronic diseases, ordinary health problems such as diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease. And it's also here in Southeast Asia that more than half of deaths of children under 5 are because of premature births and babies afflicted with pneumonia and diarrhea in the first 4 weeks of their lives. So these are important health issues that we need to tackle. Joining me for this conversation are Zig Ransky. He's the Vice Director of Nhi Đồng 315. It's Vietnam's largest network of outpatient clinics specializing in pediatrics and maternity and women's health services. And Hendra Chung, he's CEO of Click Doctor, a digital healthcare platform that serves more than 13 million Indonesians and growing. Zig, let me start with you. I mean, obviously we saw how COVID hit Southeast Asia hard and really early on. What are the lessons that we've learned from COVID and how are we leveraging off of that?
Sure. So in Vietnam, actually, at the beginning of COVID, the government policy was to sequester all of the COVID patients in the hospitals. And this worked initially at the very beginning when the number of cases were low. But slowly with Delta and then suddenly with Omicron, it became there were too many cases for them. So the government changed the policy and changed the guidance, and they said, actually, the private clinics must open, must treat the COVID patients, and we must encourage more development of the private healthcare infrastructure, specifically around outpatient care, and specifically for treating patients without severe illness, right? Because otherwise they're just crowding the hospitals.
Yeah, that really paves the way for you guys. And Hendra, we also saw during COVID that Click Doctor also provided lots of services online as well as helping with medication.
Yeah, so I think maybe some of the lessons that we learned during COVID is, first, I think before COVID, I think a lot of people think that telemedicine or telehealth is not something that's important. Yeah. Even I think some of the people here will think that, why do we need telemedicine? Yeah, we can go to the doctors immediately. Yeah. But then during COVID, most of us cannot go out, and I think Indonesia has done a lot of tremendous things. We got a lot of huge support from the government institutions and also from the private institutions. Yeah. I think the other things that we learned during COVID is there's a need of a digital healthcare investment. Not only in telemedicine, e-pharmacy, but also in the other things here. Because we need to, especially in Indonesia, we need to make sure that people, even in the remote location, can receive access of good doctors and products. Yeah. I think we are lucky because as part of Kalbe Group, Kalbe is actually our parent company. When I think about Kalbe, right, it is the only company that does so many different things and have done it very successfully. Yeah. So as part of Kalbe, Kalbe has invested heavily in Click Doctor and our other platform, yeah. And so that we can bring end-to-end ecosystem that is complete in Indonesia.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about serving 13 million so far through Click Doctor. You've got 3 apps. I wonder if you can tell us, I mean, how the telemedicine is really helping to democratize. You touched upon it a little bit. How is that democratizing healthcare and reaching the underserved?
Okay, I think in developing countries like Indonesia, right? I'm originally actually from Borneo here, so my island will be a capital city in the next coming years. So. It's very hard to find good doctors in the area. I think with in developing countries like Indonesia, in this remote location, there's almost impossible to find good doctors and even medicines here. People have to travel far away to Jakarta, maybe to Surabaya as well, to find good healthcare services or products. I think. Yeah, so that would be one of the things that we are doing actually.
Yeah, I mean, you guys in some ways operate very similar to kind of the Uber or Grab model for healthcare with Click Doctor and really giving access. Zig?
Yeah, I would just add that in addition to the doctor scarcity, the doctors are also not uniformly distributed. So if you're in Ho Chi Minh City, you might have access to a good doctor, but they might not be in your district. But if you don't live in the tier 1 cities, you really don't have access, period. So I think that's a situation where the telemedicine could be really useful.
And I wonder if an extension of that, if you can talk a little bit about how the demographic shifts that we're seeing all over, Southeast Asia and certainly in Vietnam, how that's creating growth for healthcare and certainly for your healthcare system.
Yeah, so there's actually a number of trends happening at the same time. There's obviously the development, so economic development. As people have more income, they demand more higher quality medical services. So there's that, but there's also urbanization. When people move to the city, they tend to seek out less informal healthcare treatments. So there's that. And also just the epidemiological transition as well, transitioning from infectious disease, tropical diseases to chronic care, chronic disease management. So over half of the Vietnam population are actually pre-diabetic. So there's a lot of demand in the pipeline for treatment of chronic disease, as well as cancer. There's a lot of cancer in the pipeline too. And the last thing I would mention is also the aging population. So the Southeast Asia countries have really good demographics compared to, say, the West, but they are actually some of the fastest aging populations too. Especially for elder care, we see that maybe in the next 10, 15 years being really important.
I think what's really great is both of your systems really are giving access to women and children. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that and why that's so important for this region. I mean, are we seeing health outcomes improve with what you guys are offering right now?
So I think most of the people here don't know that we have 3 platforms. We have a Click Doctor, which is the telemedicine e-pharmacy. We also have another application called Halo Bumil, which is the #1 pregnancy app in Indonesia. We have served more than 3 million active users per month. And also we have a B2B order management system where pharmacy is connected directly to the principal or brands. Yeah. So with the pregnancy app that we have, I think all of us know that people who are looking to get a baby, right? Yeah, they like to talk to each other. Yeah, even during pregnancy, after pregnancy, they like to gain more information on how to get pregnant and then how to have a healthy children. Yeah, so that is actually something that we have been improving using our technology, and I think. In the next coming of future, right, there will be a lot more features that we will be integrating inside.
Right.
Yeah, I would add that in Vietnam, there is actually high levels of infant mortality as well as pregnancy complications. And just sort of speaking about the whole idea of sustainable development, it does seem like there are some trade-offs where, for instance, increasing levels of industry makes the air worse. The children present with a lot of upper respiratory disease. The water quality is also a big concern. So got to think about how to industrialize in a way that keeps people healthy at the same time.
I mean, also what we're talking about is, these models, I mean, serving pregnant women, serving children. I mean, these are, for your businesses, thankfully, a recession-proof business model, right?
Well, yeah, people always get sick, and the willingness to pay is quite high in this segment. But I think what we're doing is really solving access and quality, because what we do is we put a clinic in a densely populated residential area. So,
and usually that's usually far away from the city center.
Yes, exactly.
So in factories, near factories,
yeah.
And
kind of the same idea as Jakarta. Ho Chi Minh City has just sprawled, and so. If you live in a certain district, you might be extremely far from the hospital. So, yeah, we're trying to make it more convenient for the patients.
I think when you look at most of the healthcare business, right, even in Indonesia or even globally, most of the healthcare company actually, I think, focus more on curative. Yeah, I think what we want to achieve is we want to focus more on preventive, yeah, because as you know, most of the people actually are healthier compared to the sick people, yeah. Even though we know that chronic disease management is one of the concerns that every one of us have, yeah, because things are sugar level is one of the issue in everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. What about the obviously, we learned a lot of lessons. It seems like there's a lot of openness to telemedicine and technology. What are the challenges that you guys are facing, and how do we overcome them?
The challenges that, especially in Indonesia, right, I think number one is internet access. Not all the cities in Indonesia, or even the suburb in Indonesia, have a good internet access. I think number two is the number of good quality doctors that we have here, because to serve as many people that we can, right, we need a lot of doctors. I think one of the things that we are developing actually, hopefully with the support from the government, is we want to develop a chatbot here, to analyze early part of the disease before getting something serious. Currently, if you want to serve million of people in Indonesia, it's not enough with the number of the doctors that we have.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that the clinician shortage is the key issue. And the problem is that normally if you have a labor shortage, you can just increase wages and people will switch to that job. But it takes 7 to 10 years to train a doctor. So even if you decided today we need to double the number of doctors that we have, it would still take decades for them to come online. So what we're doing is really trying to maximize the productivity of the doctors that we do have. And so we do that through technology, where each doctor has an application that they can use to interact with the patient. But they're also supported with significant levels of human infrastructure. So each doctor will have one receptionist, one pharmacist, one guy to park the motorcycle, and one nurse. So a lot of the patient check-in and prescription filling and marketing to the patient can be done by other staff rather than just a doctor.
Yeah, I know in some models, like in Bangkok, there's also service where doctors and health assistants are actually getting out to patients, delivering medicines, but also doing some simple checkups. Is that also, when we talk about the Grab and Uber model, is that where we're headed as well?
That is actually e-pharmacy, right? In Indonesia, there's not much issue that we have in terms of the logistics, because as part of Kalbe, we have more than 25 distribution points where we can send medicines within, let's say, from 30 minutes up to a couple of hours in the same day.
Yeah, I'd also mention that it's important, different ways you can use technology to empower even a less skilled clinician. So for instance, we built in our technology platform different ways to suggest the appropriate prescription and the appropriate dose, just to make that a lot more streamlined. So we're thinking about different models where maybe there's a nurse and then there's a doctor on telemedicine, for instance. So we can support, sometimes you need to have that person there physically to take the blood pressure or take samples or things like that. But if we can use technology to elevate the capabilities of clinicians that don't take as long to train as a doctor.
I think one thing that I can emphasize is I think there's a need of integrating telemedicine with the current technologies and new technologies such as wearable device, medical device, home medical device, or hospital medical device, so that the doctors can do diagnosis directly from the hospital or from the clinics. I think this is what you call it, omni-channel service, right? I think those will be important when you have a lot of data like that, wearable device data, medical device data, and also, let's say, from genomic as well. All this data actually can be a good health scoring. And this health scoring actually will be quite important, let's say for insurance company or even for HR. Yeah. Let's say you go to the bank right now, right? There's a credit scoring system, yeah. But then, let's say in a couple of years later, if there's a health scoring system, that will be very important and very useful because those data are real-time data.
Yeah, I think the data will be used specifically in the private sector for personalization, and then in the public sector for rationing. Because in some, sort of depending on the way that the health system is set up, sometimes even the public system don't have enough doses or inventories of different things.
Yeah. Now, Zig, you were one of the first investors in Nidam 315. Talk to us about the investment climate for healthcare systems, and especially kind of startups like yours.
So I think there's a tremendous amount of demand coming online over the next several years. I think it's a multi-decade trend, not just a couple of years trend. And so I think you need to really be careful about making sure you're set up to participate in the benefits of those trends on the same time horizon. So I think we talk with some funds and they say, well, we'd like to exit in 4 years, but we see this trend not just in 4 years, but 10 years. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in primary care, as well as specialty hospitals and healthcare services. So.
And Hendra, I mean, you guys are growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, 13 million and growing. Any thoughts about spinning off ClickDoctor and that division off of Kalbe?
For Kalbe, actually, Kalbe like to grow organically. Kalbe has been exist in Indonesia for more than 55 years. Yeah. So when I think about healthcare, right, it's a long-term investment. Yeah. I know that I came actually from a finance background, investment background. Most of the investors, when you meet them, right, they'll ask for 4 or 5 years exit. Yeah. But for healthcare, it's very different. Yeah, because it's a long-term game. But then, when you do it in a right way, you can get the returns that you want significantly. I think for Kalbe, we have a plan to go IPO maybe in the next couple of years. So now we are growing significantly year by year. Yeah.
Great. And would you spin off? I mean, after that IPO, is there a possibility or during that process to spin off ClickDoctor as well?
Depends on what your question on spinning off. Spinning off can be diluted to up to 49%, right, or more than that. But for Kalbe, the idea of spinning off is not in our mind right now. But then for us, we want to contribute to the healthcare system in Indonesia as much as we can. So spinning off is not an idea right now.
All right. We've got a question here from the audience. What more could governments do to help companies like yours thrive and meet public health needs? Zig?
So one of the reasons that the public hospital system is extremely busy is because it's very difficult to obtain licenses to open up clinics. So there's lots of different licenses at lots of different jurisdictional levels. And so the government, obviously, they're the ones, handing out the stamps, so they're the ones who could make the stamps not required. So I think they could do some more to make it easier to open up assets.
What about here in Indonesia, Hendra?
I think the government in Indonesia has been very supporting. We even have one application in Indonesia called Peduli Lindungi. I think you guys have used it when you land in Indonesia, right, to check in or to check out. Yeah. It has more than 100 million people in Indonesia have used it. I think the thing that we need help from the government is to get as many doctors as possible in Indonesia. I think if we don't have that, it will be difficult to scale up.
Great. I think that's a great thought to end on. Zig Ronsky and Hendra Chung, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Please welcome back to the stage Stephen Engel, Chief North Asia Correspondent, Bloomberg Television and Radio.
All right, everybody. I'm not going to stand in between you and the lunch outside, but I just want to say thank you for joining the Bloomberg CEO Forum at G20. We hope you enjoyed all of these conversations. And thanks again to our speakers and moderators, obviously, for a wonderful, wonderful program. And thank you to our sponsor, LPS, for making the forum possible. If you'd like more information for our sponsors, please visit the resources tab on the events website. And most of all, thank you for being such an engaged audience and providing lots of questions to us moderators. The networking lunch starts now. I hope there's some bintang dingin dingin, cold bintang. I don't know if there is. Bintang's not our sponsor, but that's what I drank a lot when I was in Lombok a long time ago. Lots of nasi goreng and lots of nasi campur and gado gado. I think all the food outside on the terrace is much better than what I ate in Lombok. Thank you. See you next time.